Ayin Beis, Volume 1, we're in the beginning of chapter 124. If I could put it succinctly in one sentence, spheres have three definitions: number, story, brightness, and the fourth one, book, sefer, or klaf, the parchment, in other words, the field of white energy upon which everything is placed. All the ink, actually the story is written on the parchment. There you go. So, and the numbers for sure. So the white parchment and the brightness are essentially the highest level that he's discussing. So earlier on, you can say in the early chapters when he was beginning to address the idea of spheres from the word number, misper, he was talking about the finite and how the finite sees the infinite. And if I can say, when we come to the last pirush, the last interpretation of Sapir, it's now the spheres are within the infinite, the brightness, and their ultimate brightness is where the infinite light that's not colored. It's like, think of it, the white, plain parchment where there's nothing on it yet. That's the most brightest part. As soon as you write a letter, even if the letter is going to tell you something, the letter itself is darkening, even if it's engraved letters. That's the whole point. Visualize this, 1 second. And now, however, how does the klaf, how does bli gvul look at gvul? How does infinite look at finite? So spheres cover these both sides. How the finite travels and sees the infinite. Misper, remember, from misper to lay misper, number to beyond number. Then there's the story, which is of course in between plays. The story tells the story of the finite and of the infinite. And now how the infinite looks at the finite. And we're now back to answering the question asked 41 chapters ago in chapter 83, which is, what does it mean that there's spheres in bli gvul? And we'll read it again, but basically he's going to answer, because if spheres were just number, you're right, number and bli gvul don't match, number and no number. But if spheres also have a definition, that they are numberless, in the sense that they are pure brightness, pure whiteness, then yes, then there are spheres. Then there's spheres as a gili, as the white parchment. Now, atik, and even higher, atmos, obviously is beyond all this parchment. It's not even bli gvul. You can't even call it brightness. So the klaf, if you think about it, the parchment, even the clear, plain, blank slate, is also compared to atmos already a levush, because he doesn't need a parchment altogether. But compared to the lower levels, the parchment, the white color, the colorless color, is obviously the brightest state possible. So in the world of brightness, of clarity, the clearest point is in bli gvul. Beyond that too is a darker level compared to Atzmus. That's why it's a levush, because Atzmus is beyond brightness, even beyond clarity. It doesn't need clarity. Light and gilui doesn't exist by him. And then, in the world of gili itself, the brightness starts to diminish as you begin to golov galifu, as you begin to engrave letters in it. First engraved, and then written, and then concealed, and then the pasayas, the curtains, and all the levushim. So this is a good way to really look at the whole picture. You're talking about how something comes from a very pure state beyond definition to a pure state of definition to beginning to take shape, which is the existence, structure of existence. And this is hinted to, of course, all in the word sphere. Now, you want this?
No, the white parchment, is that Aliyah Sarotzin?
What? In there is the Aliyah Sarotzin. No, the desire arises in there. First you need the field of energy. The parchment is the field of energy, basically. In the highest level. Then there's definitely a parchment with his yeah. Then there's a state of the parchment, like he said. There's really, let's put it this way. In the field of energy, which we call when the non-existential becomes existential, you have now Eir ha-poshet, as simple as it gets. I'm not getting into all, there are levels in that too. There's how it's in Atzmus and how Atzmus sees it. And obviously we're not talking physically, it's really conceptual levels, basically. In that purest form, you can call that, just a plain parchment, hypothetically. But then, if you remember in the end of the last chapter, he did say that there's also the root of the Eir Pnimi is there. So the real pure parchment is Eir ha-bli gvul. But in there will also be the root of the Eir Pnimi, the root, and it's not yet. And then there's the levels where there's the
write letters on it.
Yeah,
that's why it's the root of the Pnimi, the Eir Pnimi.
Yeah, but there's a state but there's a state that's even beyond the potential to write letters. There's also that type of state.
And the same parchment.
Yeah. Yeah. Because remember, the field of energy is everything that's going to happen in existence is going to happen on this parchment. So whatever happens is happening here. The question is, how far are the things that happen from the pureness and the purity of the actual Bli Gvul? So when you say the Ir HaBli Gvul in its full glory, what it's going to evolve into is going to be the Sherish of Seviv Klama. I mean, the truth is that he really defined it as three levels. There's the pure Ir Etzem, but he's calling now the Ir Atzmi. He's not talking about his Pashtus Ir. The Ir Atzmi, as we discussed yesterday, is simply only the concept of Gili, that God wants Gili. And I don't even know if that you can really call it parchment even. I'm almost sure that's not.
Parchment that is higher than the Svirus and Behiris.
Yeah, correct. And I think it is because he's saying Svirus and Behiris is in his Pashtus Ir and Hadar. Hayd is not that yet. So clearly there's a state of Pashtus of and Chanami. In other words, it's the concept of the parchment, not the parchment, so to speak. If you could put it that way. It clearly says that. So bottom line is there's the field of energy more conceptual. Then there's the field of energy that becomes brightness. It's brightness. Then there is...
But that brightness contains the Bli Gvul and the Gvul.
Yeah, everything. One second, but there's no Gvul yet. Then comes, and I think that's the state where there's infinite spheres. Infinite possibilities.
Where are we now? In what state?
Huh?
Where are we right now?
Hadar.
We're in Hadar, that's right.
This Pasha said, Atzmos, Etzema, which is Atik in the or Etzema the Hod, right? The Hod is the king in his own glory. There's no relationship with anything, but he has manifest. There is now. You could basically say it's like the king. Well, the king. God is not even a king. It's the concept of Gilead has begun. Then comes this Pashtus Er, where it becomes where the nation can recognize it. There's details, but not details as in Gvul. Details simply only because there's something to hold on to. So this would be called the cloth. This would be the white parchment. This is where there's an actual, essentially the artist has now decided to take out and create an infinite canvas upon which he's going to do things. This infinite canvas right now is infinite spheres and cats, I would say.
I mean, a canvas of infinite possibilities.
Or both, and also an infinite canvas. It also doesn't have limits. That's what I meant. In other words, it's not 5 by 5. Yeah, in other words, it's Eir HaBli Gvul in every possible way. It's both in its extent. Remember, in cage there is not just it's not spheres and cats doesn't mean Chachma Bina, and each of them go all the way. In cage it means there's no 10. It's infinite spheres. There's no Chachma Bina. Then he arises in the Shir Atzmei B'Keach. He wills.
Arich is Behiris.
Yeah, that's Arich. What we spoke till now is Arich. Now comes that he rises. Remember, we spoke these levels. If you remember, with Adonu Zenu, and we spoke Baruch Shamar. There were similar ideas there. If you recall, that's where it was all spelled out. Yeah. I have to go back to exactly define each level, but that's exactly. Remember, there was a state. Baruch Shamar was before Baruch Hu. Hu was already. You say Hu means there's a possibility. Hu is like Arich, and Baruch Shamar is like Atik. I'm almost sure that's what he said. Rad Law. Yeah. Then comes the next step is Shir Atzmei. Allah B'Ritzena. He desires existence, which means he's allocating now 10 energies. Remember, because that's also the root of energy. Then there's also another track going on that he wants to have containers, because there's going to be no definition without the containers. Okay. So there's two aspects. There's how he wants, how the energy wants to how the energy relates to structure. This is Sherish Er Pnimi now. So Arich would be, in this case, the cloth itself would be the root of Seviv Klamen. When it will later manifest after the Tzimtzum, all Kessers will be going directly linked to the Eir HaBli Gvul. So it's the root that remains existence. Even after he begins to shape 10 spheres, there's still that other level. That other level doesn't disappear. The canvas remains a full functioning entity. Hold on. Now he wills the 10. This is the 10 hidden spheres, all the way to Malchus of Ein Sof.
The way the letters emerge from the canvas.
But this is also before the Tzimtzum. 1 second. So right now, without a Tzimtzum, nothing would happen. Why? Because all this is submerged in the canvas. The whiteness, the pure whiteness of the cloth, of the parchment, dominates. So even though he wants to put in there 10, but he's not painting yet because he needs to conceal that Eir HaBligvul that's overwhelming it all. Think of it like an ocean that has objects in it, but the ocean is now dominant. Eir Ein Sof and Malach Kol HaMetzias. So even the Eir HaGvul and the Koyach HaGvul are all concealed within the Eir HaBligvul. But the Eir HaBligvul has already allocated Shir Atzmei for the 10. So it's all still in the artist.
Where's the Rishima?
There's no Rishima yet. The Rishima is the root of the Rishima will be the containers, the Koyach HaGvul, the power that is there. There's no Rishima yet. Now comes the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum conceals the whole whiteness, the whole dominance that was dominating of that intensity of divine consciousness. The Eir HaBligvul is all concealed. The Eir HaGvul is concealed. Everything's concealed. What remains is a impression, a reshima, or a residue, an impression of what? Of the Oisius, of the artist envisioning the 10 spheres.
But it's only mute by the aura.
No,
the mute by the limited aura. And it's a complete.
For all practical purposes, it's complete right now. You're going to just confuse matters if you start bringing the diminished parts. For all practical purposes, it's a black hole now. Everything is concealed. Later we'll learn that the Kav, when it emerges, it has elements from before, so it's not complete. But right now you have to say, remember, because for the purpose of containers, he asked that question far earlier, if it's only me, for the purpose of containers, for the purpose of 10 images to emerge in the canvas, you have to hide everything. You have to hide and remove, conceal everything. Then comes the Kav. The Kav is like the pen, or the quill, that interacts with the letters and begins to bring them into reality. And now you have Iris and Kalim starting to actually beginning to emerge. An Ak, you could say, is the whole picture on the canvas. And then, but Ak is primarily energy. Now we're talking after the Tzimtzum. So you're no longer talking within the artist. You're no longer talking within the Bligvul, envisioning Vul. You're talking an actual structure is beginning to emerge. And also a spiritual one, because it's not physical yet. And now, till it comes to a point, 3 stages. The first stage is that's 10 hidden spheres, it's all still amorphous. The Kav is a line, but it's still not yet shape 10. And then Natsilis is where the structure emerges. Odam Elyon, Selam Elikim. Now we have Eris and Kalim commensurate with each other. You have an image. You can look at Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes, they're balanced. There's a harmony going on, etc. Then come the next stages where it starts concealing even further. It starts concealing even the aligned structure. So till Atzilas basically gives you a divine structure. So you have structure. Now starts the concealment of the structure till the point where we just have containers or garments, as I said, cloaked in many, many, many levels. And then we retrace the steps. That's the picture, more or less. Now, obviously, there's far more to talk about. Energy, even the Kav, draws down energy from before the Tzimtzum. We have, remember the whole discussion, the effects of Sevav Kalam. We have the effect of all the Ksarim. So the Eir HaBligvul, the original canvas, the original white, plain white, blank slate, so to speak, is also impacting. How does it impact? Remember, Mesiras Nefesh, difference of the Tirei Lo, Tirei Tata, and so on. So there's an impact of those so-called transcendent forces. But the primary thing that we are contending with is immanent energy within containers that is deeply concealed. That is more or less the process. I think that's a very specific summary. And of course, it breaks down to more. The more you break down, you start going to more and more. But this is more or less how it works.
There's no mushal of the Kaf after Tzimtzum.
Speak English. What? No mushal what? No example? The Kav, I just said, it's like the quill. I think the Kav Hamida. Kav means a line that measures. The Kav is the thing that actually measures the flow. It's the flow of energy toward each level according to what it needs.
So what's the mushal of the ink on the parchment?
The ink on the parchment is the letters. Is the letters that are envisioned, the Koyach HaGvul. He said Kalim.
Right.
He said right here, it's the letter, the Kalim.
That's the Kalim. So this is
and the root of the containers.
This is the Kalim before Tzimtzum.
The root of the containers is the better way to put it.
Yeah.
The will to have letters, if you want to put it that way. Not actual letters, obviously. But the will, the envisioning of the letters. There's 2 parts to it. There's the envisioning of the letters as containers that will receive, like the Aleph, Beis, And then there's the energy that manifests in Aleph Beis.
White around the letters. The energy which is the
Exactly. And then there's the white around the whole thing, which is
all before the tzimtzum.
which is the bligvul.
Actual letters will
That's
be
I don't know. I don't know where you got that from, but it says that beferish. That when you say, for example, the letter has to be surrounded by the klaf. So there's two aspects to it. There's the letter, like for example, if you write an aleph, there's two whites going on. There's the white around the aleph, and then there's the white within the aleph, because it's lines. So there's a white that's also measured according to the aleph. When you write an aleph, besides the fact that the whole letter has to be surrounded by the entire cloth, the entire parchment, the letter itself has elements of it that are white and black. The ink, the line, let's say, is black, but then you make the two top and bottom, so there's ink inside. So that's more commensurate. That's more like the er primi, the root of the imminent.
White on the thing is Daira Sezer.
Hmm?
Yeah, and there's Daira Sezer.
Yeah, exactly. Which is the entire backdrop. Everything takes place in that. And the story is written on this. That's the chiddush.
The story is already the way the dia is on the klafas of Dav Neser.
Yeah.
Where are we in Sheshes Shemay?
Or it starts with chikik. It could start with chikik. It could start with engraving. But the engraving is also not a Dav Neser. There's basically levels. The letters start engraved, as I said yesterday. Engraved can be through and through, but engraved at the end of the day, there's a letter. That's what it means engraved. It's not the pure whiteness. It's not Eir HaBligvul. Pure Brihirus, the purest form of clarity is when there's no letters at all. Is when the infinite light is just shining every possible way in every possible direction. That's what we're up to now. And that's going to be the answer. So spheres essentially are everywhere. Now the question really that remains, that I will see whether you addressed it, is there spheres in the level of Hoid, in Eir Etzem? Because seemingly that's even beyond Behirus. I would say there are, but it's interesting. There probably are. Yeah, but it's probably the concept of spheres, not spheres as the brightness, but more the concept of air. So it's the concept of sphere. Yeah, he does, but right now we're learning it inside. Let's learn it inside.
Well, would you tell me where are we in Sheshes Shemay Bereshit?
Before the chet, before the sin.
It's obviously before the sin.
Before the sin, you have is essentially the world of Asiya is aligned with the world of Atzilus, essentially. Not exactly.
When did this all happen? The first day.
The first day, or is it just before?
You asked me what year, what century did Tzimtzum Arishan happen?
Where was it?
Yeah, this is exactly it.
Is this a joking question? Is this
in Beis, probably, right?
What happened when it's happening right now? All that I just said.
I understand it always being created, but
yeah.
When did it?
But there's no when. There's no.
We're talking
Conceptually,
which the Lithnei Tzimtzum is before existence, so there's no time. So it's like asking the question: why didn't God create the world?
This is all Yom Rishon, so to speak.
No.
There's no division.
No, there is no Yom Rishon. No Yom Rishon was created even.
Is it with minor bracious?
No. First of all, the Maimer Bereshis is the Tzimtzum. Without a Tzimtzum, there's no Bereshis. Bereshis bara lakim. Remember that. That's number one. Number two, the Yom Rishon by definition is the first sphere, and we're talking here beyond spheres. So there's no real way to understand it in time. You have to think of it. If God, well, let me ask you a question. Where's God in Sheshes Bereshis? Where do you fit him in? What day was he created? It's a ridiculous question, right? Because he created it all. So forget about Ur now. Let's just talk simple language. God created Yom Rishon. So where is it? Elokim precedes Bereshis. Simple as that. So his Ur also precedes Bereshis. Even Torah precedes. Of Paim Shana Kadma Torah Le'elam. What does that mean? 2,000 years. It doesn't mean time. It means Chochmah Bin. It means. So bottom line is. Yeah, but there's a level that's beyond levels. Understand? Even levels, even to say there's a level is already something.
Doesn't Eitz Chaim say why only 5,000?
Because it took time. Yeah. We discussed this. Yeah, but that obviously doesn't mean literal. It means because he wanted the process. There's a process that, you see, we are bound. All this is outside of time. You can't even think in terms of time. You start thinking in terms of time, you're in big trouble here. The whole thing won't make sense. We use examples in time to understand what's beyond time. For example, when I say that the artist is right now sitting and has infinite possibilities, then he envisions one possibility, then he decides to start painting it. Where's that in time? That could all happen in a split second.
Yeah, but there's a whole thing that the sixth day, everything wasn't in reality. There was no real time or space until really the sixth day, boom, and everything that was like envisioned and stuff like that. It was a structure. It was the artist putting it in
But
his mind. That's not this.
no. But you have to understand. But you're going. This is the lowest levels. You're talking here levels after it's not even close. Where we're talking is far, far beyond that. Because remember what it says in the Zohar. The Zohar asks the question. Why does it say? It should have said b'sheishis yomim asa Hashem es hashamayim v'saaretz. In 6 days God created. The pasuk says sheishis yomim asa hashamayim. 6 days God created. So the Zohar says, yeah, that's the pshat. God created 6 days. He didn't create it in 6 days. There were no days in which He created it.
Right.
There was nothing there. There was no canvas even. Anyway, and to relate to all of this, you have to understand that there is a dimension in time that's beyond time. As paradoxical as that sounds. Right now, in the moment where we are right now, everything exists. But we are bound by time. So an example I often give for this, just to give a little, if you want to visualize a bit, think of like this. Think of you're riding on a boat down a river. The river is the river of time. Where you are right now, you look at the banks of the river is the present. You see whatever you see. Whatever was yesterday is up the river. You saw it yesterday, you passed by. But whatever is in the future is down the river. But you right now here, all you can see is what you see. That's it. Now imagine a bird flying, which sees yesterday, tomorrow, and today, has a bigger picture of the banks of the river, flies down and lands on your shoulder on the boat. Now the bird is seeing what you're seeing. But it remembers and has the capacity to relate to the bigger picture. Now, think of the bird as the neshama, and you on the boat is the guf. The neshama has a sense, because it's spiritual, of a bigger picture, which is why we're able to plan ahead, why we're able to look at Purim and say, even though it was 9 years or 7 years, connect the dots, there's a bigger picture. Why we can say Golus is very difficult, but there's a bigger picture, it's leading toward Mashiach. So if you live in the moment, which we all do in the here and now, all you care about, all you know is what you feel right now. Now I'm in pain, and that's it. And what are we taught? Everything's part of a process. I once saw a beautiful way it was depicted. I don't remember where, I read it somewhere. 2 children had lost their parents at a young age. So their uncle was talking to them, and they were like, painful. They were in a field. So they saw an apple that had fallen off the tree. And the apple was half rotted and ready, like almost being absorbed in the ground. There's a point where it gets absorbed, it's like like miraculous. And literally, you could see it like preparing to regenerate. So he says to them, he points, they say, what's that? So he said, that teaches us that everything is on its way somewhere else. And we see that. That's why examples of seeds, or like in this case the apple, we think everything is frozen. We live in a very it's a plastic world. Everything is frozen. There's nothing frozen. Life is all about movement. We human beings are the only ones that are unnatural and created the concept of a couch potato, where you can just sit and do nothing. Show me an animal that works that way. There's no such thing as an animal doing nothing. Just hang around. Let's shoot the breeze or something. Let's go to 770 and hang out. Huh? There's no such concept. Look at little children. Anyone that's natural is moving. Life is a movement. But we created films and we created still pictures, and we like to, we harden things. Death is static. Life is movement. But movement doesn't just mean you move around. Kol chayim isnei. Movement also means history moves. You're part of a process. Your parents were before you. Your children are after you. It's movement. You see all people that were alive. The Rabbi was alive. Every movement. I remember when Vyshinsky, the photographer, came. He started photographing the Rabbi. He came to do a project for a magazine. His specialty was motion photography, which is a special art. High speed. People like ballet, horse racing, sports. We have to capture movement in a picture. It's not just a face. That was his specialty. He told this to me. He said to me when he began to photograph the Rebbe, and he was like a perfectionist, this artist, also with all of his eccentricities, he said that the pictures, and he used to develop his own photographs. He said, he told me. He said they were not coming out. And he realized why, because he said you always have to have the cooperation of the person, of the subject you photograph, if you're real photographs. Obviously we just take a picture, you don't need the cooperation. He says the Rebbe was not accepting that he should photograph him. So he wrote to the Rebbe in Russian a note saying that he's doing a project and he would like the Rebbe to agree that he could photograph him. He said after that, he was able to photograph. And that is a miracle. Then I said to him, what does that mean? And he told me an interesting thing. He said from all the motion photography he ever did, the Rebbe was the fastest mover he ever saw. Not that he walked fast, but his movements, he says his hand movement, it was a sign of real life. So I said, anyone that you know that you photographed a sign of death? He said, yeah, and he told me some names, which I won't repeat. He says, you could see it. They always look the same in every picture. He says, the Rebbe never looks the same in two pictures. Because his face is always moving, he's alive. And life is movement. Not just the eyes, the sparkle. He says, the Rebbe was a fundamental. He told this to me. And he's the guy that says, total atheist, I don't believe in anything. Then I said to him, so how's life? Baruch Hashem. You know, he went to the oil and he told the Rebbe that he should give him a blessing after Gimel Tammuz. So he's like one of these paradoxical Russians. And trust me, the real paradox, because he's the other extreme. He said he's the one that told me the classic line after Gimel Tammuz. He said, all this fighting you guys have in history, the only way you change things is you have to assassinate somebody. He says, it's not going to work with diplomacy. If you don't like somebody, execute him, and you'll see changes happen. What's that? There's a certain truth to it, but I was not going to repeat that. I said it now for the record, but I'm not advocating this. I'm saying it b'shem emrei. Maybe go a little later. But am I right? This is.
Wait, just say you don't mean the speed of.
Right. I don't mean anybody.
God forbid. The Rebbe's movement was amazing.
So you hear it?
He's doing ballerinas.
He moved his hand. It was like unbelievable. The speed was.
Yeah. That's what I said. When he moved his hand by Kosher Bracha and by other things, he told this to me, and he actually told me names of people. He says, "I'll show you a picture. They always look the same. And it's the face of death, and I know how to capture their death. They look nice because they put cosmetics on. They make themselves look. He says you could see it. You see they're static people. He could see it in the photograph. It was very interesting to me. I didn't ask him about me. I didn't want to hear that I'm a face of death or anything. So the jury's out on that. Anyway, the point that I'm making here is that what is the point that I'm making? Life. That I'm just trying to give a little visualization. You see, we're so trapped. You cannot imagine. I would say how trapped you think you are, you can multiply it by 100%, because we don't even know our blind spots. And I think about it all the time. I think how many things that I process is based on my static, perspective of here and now, the material, or not. I think, like I keep saying, when you learn Ayin Beis, it challenges you. If it doesn't challenge you, if you don't feel uncomfortable, it's not a good sign. It means that you're either fitting this into your model, or you're totally not getting it. Because it's not about fitting it into previous models. It's about challenging your perceptions of time and space and purpose and existence and so on. Okay. Apart Hatzekevet, this bright Isru Chag morning. Isru Chag as in Isru Nittel, whatever. America is now going into its 7-day or 14-day, static football and so on. Sports is a good example, by the way. Like they say, baseball is 18 people who don't need to lose weight are being watched by 70,000 who do need to. 70,000 people who need to lose weight are watching 18 people who don't. So when people say, are they into sports? Yeah, I watch football every Sunday. Perfect example of death.
Never did like watching sports.
The Rebbe didn't like watching anything. The Rebbe was a player. Who watches? The whole by the way, can you show me anyone that watches? Show me anything in the animal, vegetable, or mineral kingdom that sits and watches.
You watched by the parade?
What? The Rebbe watched. He participated. He spoke. He was part of the parade. What do you mean watch the parade? The Rebbe was not an observer. Observant Jews was for other people. A participant. You ever see the Rebbe how he's alive by a parade? The Rebbe was not a watcher. No. It's like the biggest insult you could say. It's like they say, people. There are people who make things happen. There are people who watch things happen, and there are people who ask what happened. You just have to decide which one are you. There's no fourth category. There's the undecided, of course, but that's, as you can imagine, what that is. I'm undecided. I'm not sure whether I make things happen, or I watch things happen, or I ask what happened. That's even after that's off the charts. I wouldn't even mention that. Right? It's like the guy who says, I used to think I'm indecisive, and now I'm not so sure. That's the category. Yeah. It's a category. When they take polls, you come to someone, you say, okay, you yes, no, or undecided. He says, I think I'm undecided. Then that's a category. Then they give it a statistic that 30% were undecided. I told you the story with me, Simchas Torah. The Rebbe told me, my father, as a spectator, he also became a spectator. So I've chosen, I have direct koiches from above not to be a spectator.
That's a journalist.
Spectator sports.
That's a journalist.
Well, I'm not a journalist. My father was more of a journalist. I'm not a journalist. I am not that objective. Yeah. I ever told you Chaim Potok, I had a Shabbaton with him in Rutgers University at New Brunswick by Kalbach.
He wrote Asher Balev.
He wrote The Chosen. It's not best. That's a big book. So he grew up in a from home, then he went to Korea, lost his faith. Here's the whole story. So he spoke Friday night, I spoke Shabbos day. I'll just tell you briefly. It was very interesting. So he got up there, and he said that in the late 60s, early 70s, when he wrote The Chosen, which became a major bestseller, Chosen was about a frum Jew, about a son of a rabbi that loses his faith and has his whole soul searching. It's his own story, really. He tells that his own story. He lost his faith when he saw in Korea. He went as a chaplain, and he saw such senseless death. He said, "There's no God." Anyway, so he talks about his doubts and so on. You see, there's a video in Gem. There's a video where you can see him sitting there, and the Rebbe talks about a writer using his koiches.
That was him?
Yeah, to not just write. Yeah, that was him.
Those are 9.5 mystics.
No, Wiener wasn't there. It wasn't Wiener. There was also Herman Wook.
Yeah.
The 3 times the Rebbe spoke this: Wook and Wiesel and Potak. 1 time was Potak. You could see clearly, he's sitting right there.
He's just for what?
That when a person is blessed with God, with ability to write, the Rebbe says it's not just to write and entertain; it's to teach people hashgacha pratis, to see God everywhere. Because you're an influence and you have the power to influence. The Rebbe is, common shit to that. When you use talented, not that you don't use it, you should use it for the right thing. It's a story with Natan Yalin Moore with my father, for another time. Anyway, Potak said that someone came to him in the early 70s, Chabad guy, to convince him to come see the Rebbe. He says he didn't want to go see the Rebbe in Yechidus because he felt it would, these were his words, it would bias him. The Rebbe's charisma and power would not allow him to be objective, and he wanted to remain objective as a writer. So but then he was being pressured, so he decided he'll make a compromise. He won't go in Yechidus, he won't go to personal audience, he'll go to Fabreina. And that's when he went in the early 70s. That's the video we have. Maybe he went more than once. And he was by the Fabreina. And that was his basic gist, that he remained a writer and remains more or less objective, be able to write properly. So he didn't know who I was, and he didn't know what I'm speaking the next day. So then there were questions after he finished. So I raised my hand. And I said, may I ask you a question? Yeah. What happens if God would have invited you up to Mount Sinai? Would you also not have gone because you would lose your objectivity? He got so upset, and his wife was there too. They started yelling at me. Like they were very insulted by the question because they got what I was asking. I said, "What? Anyway, afterwards we walked home. He didn't answer. He was all like frazzled by it. When we walked home, I told him who I introduced him. He knew who I was, and he said, "Okay." I apologized. But the next day, I changed my whole talk to talk about that. I said, yesterday we heard Dr. Potak say that he's objective. He didn't want to see the Rebbe because he didn't want to be affected. I have to admit right at the outset that I'm not objective. I did meet the Rebbe, and he affected my life. And whatever I say is no longer pure. It's not unbiased. But I have a question to Dr. Potak. By making a choice not to go, that's also subjective. Because he didn't have the opportunity to see everything. I said, who in life is objective? Everything we do is subjectivity. He decided his subjectivity is not to go on the mountain. And Moshe Rabbeinu did go on the mountain. I said objectivity, and I said, the beautiful thing I would like to say is that I think Dr. Potak is at a far higher level than me. Because if he felt that if he met the Rebbe, he would no longer have free choice. I met the Rebbe, and my Yetzer Hara is as strong as ever. So I'm very, impressed that he felt that if he met the Rebbe, it wouldn't affect. Obviously, I was being... Nice. And basically said that, look, even if you see the truth, God made it in a way, you still got free will. That's the paradox. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. I don't know why, I'm just saying that. Cool. Yeah. So he came over to me and says, that's a very good point you made. You know?
He was there when you was talking.
No, this is Yetzirah is ganz fein. Either way, what's the difference? I saw he didn't see.
He was there Shabbos during the day?
Yeah. He was there all Shabbos. We were there together. We were the two, we were
Wow.
double billing. He was Friday night, I was Shabbos day.
Wow.
I wrote it up I think I wrote up the whole article. It was very interesting Shabbos. Very nice. Not a big crowd. There was a big crowd there. It was in Rutgers, New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Did he
Biggest
come back
Chabad house?
I told you know my definition. You keep saying from.
Don't
You know where I go.
forget. Okay, keep that simple answer.
I don't know. I don't think he does this. That's what you ask. Huh? He right now has his soul is back in heaven, so everything is fine there. On earth, honestly, I didn't ask. I don't know, and frankly, I don't even care. You know why? Because it's not my job. That's between him and God, and I never asked you how from you are.
You can see.
Huh? That's cultural. That's not from.
I didn't grow up in this culture. I forget it. We can't call it that.
The Frierdiker Rebbe told a woman who was in Yechidus, her name was Mrs. Denberg, not related to the Denberg, she gave some money for the yeshiva. The Frierdiker Rebbe was blessing her in Yiddish and pouring on these blessings that in her schus there'll be many students and they'll become leaders. She suddenly starts crying. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, why are you crying? In Yiddish. She says, the Rebbe is giving me the Rebbe is pouring on all these blessings and I'm not even from. So it doesn't, she was embarrassed. So the Rebbe said to her, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, Bezel, Loshen, you can live with this and I'm not going to give you any commentary. He said these words, Mein Tochter, Heinz Tag, weiß mir nicht wer ist from. My daughter, today we don't know who is from. So this is the word straight from a Rebbe, Shchina medaberes metegrene. It's interesting.
Why are you saying this as fact? How do you weren't there?
I heard it from reliable sources. Remember, the people were in Yechidus with the Frierdiker Rebbe those days because of the stroke, so there was always someone there, most cases.
Only Jacobson.
The Rebbe was sometimes, there were a few others, there was Chaskind,
So
there was...
the Rebbe repeated it? Who repeated the story?
I heard the story. First of all, she repeated it, and second of all, I heard it from reliable sources. You don't have to trust it. I'm just telling a story. Well, it's too much for you to swallow?
Because at first I heard that the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't really have Yechidus in with women.
What? Really?
Nah, she gave money. She's printed in Yal Air. You'll see her name. That she went in, that's for sure. Not, talk about it. You could say you don't know this. That's not correct. The Frierdiker Rebbe had Yechidus. I told you there was always someone there.
I don't understand.
In most cases. And when you're saying the Rebbe is less from than Frierdiker Rebbe.
It's nothing to do with from.
No, we don't know who's from today.
Right, exactly. Anyway, this is a story. Look, to me, when I heard the story, I wasn't shocked because the content is everywhere. The words, I wanted to just share the words. Listen, take it or leave it. You could do the same like I said. I don't say you should take it on my word. Research it. I don't
You
have.
told me to be a skeptic.
No, I'm telling you, don't take it. I rely on it. I didn't tell you should. So let's continue on. Page Reish Mem 240, chapter Kuf Chav Daled 124. Since there's recordings here, I should make the announcement like the NFL makes, that no recordings or any copies can be reproduced without written permission from the sources. Kuf Chav Daled, chapter 124, page 240. As I said before, that now that we know that spheres are far broader than just God choosing instruments that structure misper, a number, or even telling a story, the spheres have in them the meaning of behirus and brightness. Based on that, we can understand the question asked 40 chapters ago, how the spheres also in the oblique. Until the pirish the spheres say lashon spheres behirus had the ikadin is ashach ben sef oblique. Because according to this third interpretation that we've learned, that sphere comes from the word sphira behirus, which means brightness. The primary place of brightness is where is the Ein Sof HaBli. So on the contrary, this interpretation is actually more in the infinite transcendent light, the way we said, the clear white parchment or canvas, infinite canvas. Why? Because this is the level, this is the only level that is literally a revelation of the Etzem itself. And everything that could be revealed is revealed here, as he repeated twice in the previous chapter. Another way to visualize this, by the way, using the artist, I think is a great way to visualize it. We human beings, we exist in a world of duality. So everything is a subject and an object. You know, like every sentence when you learn in grammar is that there's a subject, there's the person, and there's the object. I, Simon Jacobson, am speaking. You know, or let's have breakfast, or let's meet. So there's always the people involved, the person, and the object. There's always there's a third thing, which is of course the connection between the subject and the object. So I'm an artist, and I will take now a quill or a brush, you see, and make a painting. Hey, is this me?
Yeah.
For the crowd, this is Ayin Beis coming to life. This is Zadie?
Yeah.
You made a picture of me?
No, Patty.
No, that's Tati. Oh, Tati made it. Okay. The Rebbe said children like this are example for Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. So he walked right in the right place. Because when you see, when they're consumed with something, children, they're totally consumed, nothing else. There's no room for 10 spheres, for 5 spheres, for 1 sphere, for a million spheres. They're completely, so that was a living example. Okay, so what was I saying? So when we take a picture, we make a picture. So there's you, the artist, taking ink, a brush, a canvas, a palette, and creating something. So there's a whole bunch of items here. So you can say that you and your instrument, your brush, and the picture are 3 separate things. When it comes to the divine way of creation, no. The same instrument that shapes numbers also tells the story, and also is the brightness that reflects the source. So God, using the spheres, it's multi-purpose spheres. They're doing many things at once. They're shaping, which is the number part, the structure. They're telling a story, and they're also revealing. It's just a way of putting it. Like you say, Hu Hamadav, Hu Yedei, Hu Yedu. He is one with that, and the spheres are an expression of the divine. So that's the Gilim and Etzemam. V'zeu inyan Spheres Shebein Ein Sof, and that's the meaning of Spheres in Ein Sof. Hainu b'chinas is Pashtus Eir. Hainu b'chinas is Pashtus Eir. And this is what means Spheres in Ein Sof. So we have Ein Sof and we have Spheres in Ein Sof. It's not the same thing. We're not saying Ein Sof is Spheres. We're saying in Ein Sof, which we're going to learn now, is the Etzema Eir, in the field of energy that is beyond anything we have Spheres. If that's the case, I have to correct myself. It could very well be that the white parchment is Atik too. And the Spheres is the brightness of Atik. Because remember, he said Hadar is a levush for Hoyd. Hoyd is... It may be... Okay, let me just see it inside. So Spheres, where the Spheres is Pashtus Eir? What is that? Well, Kanal B'inyan Hoyd v'Hadar. As we learned before, Hoyd and Hadar, Levashta, which comes before Eita Er Kasalma. We learned that the pasuk it says Heid v'had levasht Eita Er Kasalma. So Eita Er Kasalma, he wraps himself in light like a shirt. He said that's Eris and Kalim in Atzilus. Heid v'levasht is a level before that, where Heid v'hadar, Heid is like he said, the Heid Etzema Er. Heid is Etzema Er. V'hadar hu b'chinas is Pashtus Eir, shu b'chinas levush. And Hadar is already how the king, how the majesty is manifesting, is expanding, expressing. And that's already a levush. Now, a levush, it's a levush to Haid. But Haid is also a levush, as we learned before, to Atzmos. Ach b'chinas levush, 1 second. But what kind of garment, however, is it? Like we said, it's not a garment, a concealer, like the garments that come later after the containers, lower than the containers. This is a levush eir. It's a levush eir. This is a garment of light. It's a garment of light. Shemegales etzem, that reveals the etzem. Because remember, also Hadar is revealing the etzem. Hadar is revealing the Hoyd of the king. Lefi shegam is pashtus hu b'chinas gili etzem, because also the extension is revealing the etzem. So we're not talking about that Hoid is revealing the core and Hodar is not. Hodar is the revelation of what Hoid is, which Hoid is the revelation of what the etzem is. But Hoid is as he is on his own. There's an expression sometimes they use as Gili la'atzmei. The Eir as it reveals to yourself, and there's the Gili l'zulase. I don't know if this can be compared to these two. That may be a little lower, but it has similarities to it. Because it's the king as he's connected to the nation. Now, of course, there's no physical nation here. But conceptually, it's beginning an expression that can be related to something outside of his own core. He said clearly, Hoid is Hodar. There's no. I don't know what you mean by mitzimtzum. I wouldn't say it's less at all. It's only expressed. It's expressed. By saying expression, you're right away saying that it's not the purest form, but there's no dilution here. Nothing has changed really. It's the king, the same majesty of the king is in his own private chamber, or he's standing on the porch, and there's a big parade and everybody's watching him. So it's the same thing, except one is manifest in a revealed way, and one is just as he is in his core level.
As he is. There's no Gili Hoid.
Hoid is Gili. It's Gili compared to Etzem. That's it.
Gili Etzem means Gili Etzem in Etzem Ha'or or Etzem Atzmus? You say Gili Etzem.
Hoid is Gili Atzmus, and Hodar is Gili Etzem Ha'or.
But here when it says Gili min Etzem.
I just said to you. So, if 1 second, if Hoid is the Gili Ha'etzem and Hodar is the Gili of the Etzem Ha'or, so Hodar is the Gili of the Etzem too. But it's two different states. I explained this at length yesterday. Remember, Atzmus is beyond Gili. You can't call it a Gili. So as soon as you say the word expression, like you said, if you go back to the previous page, he uses these words. The sun, the Kador HaShemesh is the Etzem. The sun, the light within the sun is Etzem Ha'or. The light outside of the sun is Pashtus Ha'or. That's, look at it like that. Yeah, this is the example he gave. He says, who says Gili has to be to someone? When the king has a majesty, there's you learn the whole chapter. The king has majesty even if there's no one around. He doesn't need. You're talking in a lower level. You need something.
He has majesty. That's Hoid when it's not Gili.
Right, exactly. It's a Gili compared to the Etzem because the Melech doesn't even need majesty. Majesty itself is already an expression of something. It's a definition. He says like this. V'kol eiru b'chinas levush l'gabei etzem, dainu rak gilim in etzem, shemagalas etzem, avl einu b'chinas etzem gufa. Anyway, I explained this in many different. I would suggest you re-listen to it because I'm not going to repeat everything. I said this in many different ways, and I even said that you're going to need a lot of thinking about it. If you remember that, so I'm not going. It's not going to take. It needs thought. But bottom line is, no. There's etzem, there's gili etzem, Hoid, and there's Hodar. Hoid v'Hodar lavashta. Who's lavashta? Atzmos. So even Hoid is lavashta. I don't know, but make it sound like your chelus is easier to understand when you use that word. Whatever you understand. If it makes it easier, fine. I can't say that level is that level because it doesn't say that level. I probably think it's. I'm not.
Between Atmos and this level, the difference might be in between.
Yechelis is often used when we speak Eir HaKol Batzmusei, the way the energy is encompassed in the Etzem. It's like how the Etzem has the power to create Eir, or to produce Eir. So maybe even higher than what we're talking here. What you're talking, Yechelis Atzmus. Because there is just completely... Here you're talking about, I mean... Right now, in my opinion, whatever works for you can somewhat use. And then we'll go from there. Put it back.
If you were connected to that one moment, you went in and out.
What?
You were connected.
Now it's now. Yeah, something happened. What did you just do? Okay, the chair was on it or something.
Not even over here.
If you don't mind.
What?
Shmei. How does it get?
I don't know. You tell me why. If you don't mind, explain to me why Shmei is important, and now we'll go ahead. If it's so important, why wouldn't he bring it here? Why do you need to know where Shmei is? Well, I don't even know what Shmei means to me. To me, it means a name.
Who Shmei Bilvat? It's before everything.
Why is that important? Because you simply read it somewhere.
I don't know, because I see this quotation all over.
But all over except in this chapter. So why?
Maybe we can connect somehow.
The reason I'm resisting answering because Shmei is explained in 5-6 different ways. So I don't know which way to go here. I would refer you to Sefer Erchim where he brings a collection of all the different meanings. Shmei can be Malchus of Ein Sof. Shmei could be the Eir of the Esser Sfiras Agmuzas. It can be the Eir of Sfiras Ein Ketz. It can be the Eir of the Arich, Hadar, and it could be Hoid. All these interpretations say in different Memorim. Well, because all you really need to know with Shmei is that there's something that's besides Hu. Now, by the way, Hu is also interpreted in many ways. Hu doesn't always mean Atzmos. Hu could mean Hoid, and Hadar is sometimes Shmei. So that's my answer to you. It really depends which my modim. Shmei in general is just is only a way of telling us that God is using an interface to connect with us. That's the real meaning of Shmei. Like just like there's a level of Eir, there's Shmei. Some places will say Eir, Shem, Koyach is all the same thing. Sometimes he distinguishes it. But for all practical purpose is because there's a relationship between us and the divine, and there's levels. Like I keep saying, the stepping stones.
I understand.
So when we, for example, just like you say God is named as Kael, Shem Kael is in Chesed. You're saying is, like the Medrash says, Nikra ani nikra lefi maisi. When God manifests. So Shem is just a manifestation. So there's a Shem Etzem, which is usually Shmei. When you say Stam Shem, there's the Shem Hapratim. We learned this also. Shem Etzem, if you remember, Havaya is Lavon. The other names are colored. But they're all divine forces. Remember we learned a few chapters back, the Shem Etzem is Lavon Etzem, is the Lavon Atzmi, the Gavin Atzmi. So when you say no, but you seem to bring the word shame. I just showed you here. There's many ways to define shame.
I mean, we can basically every level here we can download it all over.
Exactly, that's exactly the answer.
The point: why is it important to tell us that who Shmei Bilvat before everything?
Because I just told you. Because it's like the majesty that he has, that is part of him. Because the interface needs always two sides. It needs to be outside. It has to be something that relates outside of the godly, of the core, and it has to be something that reflects the core. So Shmei is one example that does that. Eir is the real better example. So if you want to replace the word Eir and Shem, you can do that. As I said, in different Maimorim speaks different ways. Sometimes Shem is lower than Eir, sometimes it's the same level. It's at different levels in Eir. You're asking the same question. Why do you need levels before the Tzimtzum altogether? The answer, I keep saying the same answer. There's no interface without that. There's no way to reconnect. There's no connection between us and God if there isn't something that has some godliness and has something that is of the structure. Why is that?
You can't say Chada Balashta by itself.
You could say whatever you want. The Pasuk doesn't say it. The Pasuk says Haid v'Hadar Levashta.
There's no declaration between.
I don't know. I mean, it's a hypothetical question. The Pasuk says both, which means that both are necessary.
Haid v'Hadar Levashta, it implies some kind of action ready. It's if kind of like the Almighty decided to play, throw the dice, and then but when he said that who Shmei Bilvad, it means like before any.
I don't know. I don't know what. I don't know. This distinction, I don't understand the distinction you just made. For me, there's no actions going on altogether.
The difference?
No.
We are told that before everything, It was him and his name. So it means his name is also Kodum. Shmei Kodum.
And this is all.
Everything is Kodum. Everything that he encompasses is Kodum.
So what's your point?
I don't know. That's why I'm stuck.
I understand. That's the whole idea of Ayin.
On the 20th floor. I don't know. Somewhere I'm stuck in this. Why did
I would wait till we learn this inside. There's Maimorim that talk about this. What you're saying, there are Maimorim that discuss this directly. You're asking me whether Ayin is Kodem like Kadmuse. Okay? By the way, you could say the exact opposite. Because you're saying Hoyehu Shmei Bulvad, Achalei Nivra Elam, it says. Achalei Netzala Elam. That's all lower levels. You could say the whole thing is talking about Atzilus or Bria. Now before Bria, if you really want to... no, for you, I'm just satisfying you. You shouldn't have nightmares. Since you're bothering you. Okay. Achalei Nivra Elam. So if you really want to go, you can put it in very low levels. And another thing, as soon as you say Hoyehu Shmei, what does that mean? There's duality? There's only one God? Anyway, being that this is not the discussion in this chapter, and it's going to just confuse matters, I wouldn't go there. I gave you some sources you can look up if you're interested. And if you want to talk about it privately, we can talk about it. Practically, the only thing I would say is Shmei. All these levels we're talking about, you can call Shmei. Because they're all essentially before the Tzimtzum here. So we're talking about levels that are Gili Mina Etzem Mamish. It's a pretty strong level. And trust me, Shmei is not Hu, right? So why is it better than Hoyd and Hodder? That's also not Hu. There's Etzem. Okay. Because also this pashtus, also the extension is a revelation of that. Because we're not yet talking letters, we're not even talking 10 spheres, we're just talking revelation here. Well, the Yesei Bechinis is pashtus shayach sham inyan spheres. So in the etzem you can't even say brightness. But being that it's a pashtus, an extension, you can already say brightness.
That's the answer, basically.
The Hainu Bechinis his galus ha'el sha'unyan sh'zeh inyan sfira. The revelation of energy, that's the inyan of sfira. And specifically according to what we learned earlier, Perikuf Chav Beis, you can see there's a lot of summation here of what we learned. Chapter 122, the Hodar who shabah b'dibur b'ribui pratim. That Hodar is already, remember Hidur. Pri-Eitz Hodar doesn't just mean a nice fruit. It's the details. When you look for an esrog that's beautiful, there's a lot of details in what makes it Hidur. Same thing with the king's Hidur. Hodar. So Hodar is already ribui pratim. Because here, what he's struggling with here right now, trying to explain here, is a very thin line. When you say spheres, you're saying something. You say something has spheres, you're already not talking about a pure substance. There is some type of alloy, right? You're mixing in something here. If it's pure Eid B'ligvul, which is this pure shapeless energy, what's the meaning spheres? So fine, we've established it's not spheres from the word number, we've established it's not spheres from the word sipur, story, it's behirus, it's brightness. But you're saying brightness in something. Eid Ein Sof, yes, spheres in Eid Ein Sof. It's interesting, you could just say maybe Eid Ein Sof is a sphere. But that's not what he's saying. He says, on the other hand, we know spheres later and lower levels are going to be 10 spheres. So it's true, even in the lower levels, Chochmah, Bina, Dat, and so on, the 10 spheres, they have the 3 meanings. And when you say spheres, it also means 10 brightness, 10 levels of brightness. So what does spheres mean in Bligvul? You can't say it means 10, because that's a contradiction to the word Bligvul. As I said, white parchment, you have white light. There's no shape and form. So you can't define spheres by shape and form. So you're saying what spheres is now from the meaning behirus, brightness. That you could say. Even on white light, on clear white. On energy itself, you could say energy manifests the concept of brightness. That's what light is. It's bright. In the Kalim, it shines through the Kalim, like you said. A clear window is a piece of matter that happens to be transparent, so light goes right through it without any resistance. But what about light itself? So light is brightness. Fine. But as soon as you say that, you're also attributing some property. The word brightness is a property. You can't say on the etzem the word brightness. You can't say God is bright. Atzmus Mahus we're talking. Why? Because he's beyond bright, he's beyond concealed, he's beyond Helam, beyond Gili. There's no such definitions. So what do we have here? We have here a manifestation of a divine manifestation in what we call from Bil to Mitzias Nimtza, it's moved to Mitzias Nimtza. So it's an existence. So he's saying there's two steps in it. There's Hoid v'Hadar. Hoid is the concept of brightness, but you can't call it yet Sfiris until it begins to express itself in some way. So he spoke earlier about the king. The king has a majesty even if he's alone in his private chamber. And then there's the majesty that you see, Berevam Hadras Melech, Hadras. You see when there's a parade. You see many people honoring him. Berevam. Why Berevam? He doesn't have the majesty without the being honored. So he answered two things he said. One is Emel B'layam is the nation, once they crown the king, a new level of Malchus enters into him, which is why he now has a new dimension of awe. He's not just an appointee by them. He's asked the question, if the nation appointed the king, so it's like any minister. Why does he have such or why do they stand in awe of him? They just appointed him. He's on their level. He's higher than them, but he's like a minister. So he said, because a level of Malchus enters to him that's beyond the nation. And that's what creates awe. And then he said, the second thing he said, that he had it before. The nation just reveals it in him. So in other words, we all have within us a very core element of the say Yisrael, Melachim Haim, B'nai Melachim Haim. We have Malchus, an essential majesty. So what happens? Well, if your parents don't treat you right, and people don't treat you right, and so on, the Malchus can remain in your core, and you don't have self-respect. Why shouldn't we all have self-respect and self-confidence? Because what's happening is the Malchus has become concealed within you, and the outer level, the conscious life you live, a person doesn't feel self-esteem. That's Malchus is Behelim. That's called Malchus and Golus. We spoke before, Nephilis HaMalchus. And then you need Hakamas HaMalchus. When Yaakov raises up the pillar of the stone, he's lifting Malchus. When it says Mashiach will come, the Oshlav is Hakamas HaMalchus. Churban Beis HaMikdash is Nephilis HaMalchus. When the moon is diminished, is Nephilis HaMalchus. That's what it's called. Yeridus HaMalchus. When it's lifted up, it's called Aliyas HaMalchus. So going back, so the king has it. The expression of it is an expression of a core thing that can someone say to you, yeah, you have all that, you have a godly chelik alakam mal mamash. But he's behaving in a way that's completely contrary. The answer is, it's asleep. It's dormant. It's in you, but it's not expressed. That would be etzem eir, and then there's ispashtus. So you could have the etzem is intact, but there's no ispashtus. I'm just giving an example for it. And this is all not the etzem. The etzem you is even beyond chelik elokal mamash. Chelik elokal is already a definition of your soul. The core is beyond that. As an example of humans, but using what he says here, atzmus is beyond it all. Etzem eir hoid is that majesty that is there at a core level, not dependent on anything. But then where is Sfiris? When you say brightness, Sfiris is when that is manifest. That becomes revealed. Now here obviously it's not yet revealed to anyone because no one exists yet. But the concept of revelation has now become manifest. That's Hoid v'Hodar Levashta. Well, the Yeshu Shaykh Shamin Sfiris, the Hainu B'chinas Hayizkal, then he goes on far. B'frat, especially, this is plain. Now to explain it further, especially when you take into account what we learned earlier, that Hodar is not just beauty. You could say, you know what? Okay, the king in his palace, in his inner chamber, no one knows who he is. Now he comes out on the porch, or he comes out to the Welt. They see charisma, they see majesty. Not just that, he said there's pratim involved. Creates Hodar doesn't just mean you see a nice fruit. There's details in the shape, in the kmotim, in the whole thing, in the tzir, in the mara, the giddel, the giddel is the way it grows. Yeah. So there's details. So taking that into account, you can understand even more how there manifests an element of brightness. In other words, when you see the king, you can actually describe things. It's still not the king's commands. We're not talking about spheres yet, in the context of the king says do this, go learn, do a mitzvah. We're not talking about that. But we're talking about the majesty itself is not just a general one. You can describe it. You can describe details about it, like we learned in chapter, like he said, 122. So the pratim in this pashtus, that's the spheres. So this is now an additional element. The mere fact that it's expressed is number one. Number two, there's details. And now he's explaining. To explain this, he says, I know that and this is like it's known in the Antu Chad, you are one, but not the measurable one. We learned this expression many times. They said you could say Ayin Beis is somewhat of an explanation in Pasuk Eliyahu. So Antu Chad, we learn different levels, but he's speaking obviously in a very high level here. Being that he's fundamentally one, he's at core Chad be'etzem. He's not one as opposed to, let's say, you have one apple, not 5 apples. There's no Chad be'etzem there. You could say it's one, but it's not the only difference why it's not 5, because I just don't have 5. You say something's be'etzem chad means it's unique. It stands out. It's not one of many. It's fundamentally in a different category. So that he says v'hainu b'chinas atik. Thank God for this parenthesis. That means hoid. So because he's chad be'etzem, gam hispashus zeh b'chinas arich. Also his extension sheba b'riba madregus ulei b'chushbon. That comes in many levels is without any count. Oh, this is powerful here. This is actually a very fundamental mimer from the Mittler Rebbe, the Rebbe cites that's connected to this. Let me explain. What does it mean, Antu Chad v'lei b'chushbon? If he's Chad, why do you have to say there's no number? It's redundant. On the contrary, it's actually minimizing it. Something is really one, then you have to say, he's one, but not with any measure. It's like saying, but you're already now putting him in the world of measurement. Why do you have to say that? Chad be'etzem, that's it. Antu Chad, he's Chad yochid, yochid be'ela, whatever the expression we use. So Chad v'lei b'chushbon is really saying the following, that he's fundamentally one. When this oneness manifests, it's an infinite possibilities. You see what's going on here? So the one is not yet infinite possibilities. Atzmos ha'er we're talking. Etzem ha'er doesn't need billions and infinity to describe his greatness. But if you put him into the world of numbers, what will he look like? 1, 500, 1,000, million? No, blig vul. So in other words, something, let me explain a little more. When something is really real, wherever it is, it's going to be everything. It doesn't mean it's defined by being everything, but if you put it into a world, it's going to be the most of it. He's going to quote soon from Chayesara, the Maimer. Why Chayesara Me'ah Shana? When you say Me'ah Shana, if God is beyond if Shleimus of Atzmos, the perfection of God is not defined by anything. Why do we say 100 is the full number? The answer is because when you take Atzmos and put him in the world of numbers, he's going to be the complete number. So if you say something is perfectly beautiful, you'll say no, that doesn't define God. But if you put God in the world of beauty, he's going to be perfectly beautiful. You see the point? So it goes like this: He contains everything, but nothing defines him. So the Mittler Rebbe elaborates on this in a very powerful way. That from something that is truly perfect, you will have infinite amount of numbers, which initially sounds counterintuitive, because you'd say, you know what? If something is really perfect, why is it going to express itself in so many different ways? It should express itself in one way. Everything should be a clone, right? Think about it. If something is a very pure entity and then it spreads itself out, what's it going to create? Everything's going to look like that pure entity. Why does it separate into infinite different possibilities? Like we have human beings. How many human beings have lived on this earth from the beginning of time? Trillions, right? You count everybody. And we say, Ein Deus Ein Shavis. No, never were there two the same. There were never two same people on earth. And there never will be. And if hypothetically existence went on endlessly, it would continue to be different. How could that be? The answer is because God is not defined by his personality. He has no personality. So when there's something that's complete pshittus, when it comes into the world of personality, it creates infinite personalities. If God had a personality and said, okay, now I'm going to create things like in my image, you're going to have things that look like that personality. Like we do. What do we do when we hire a team? We hire people like ourselves. Sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. You know. No, I understand. But when something is completely beyond personality, when it goes into the world of personality, it will create infinite personalities. You follow what I'm saying? So God is no color. But when we put him in the world of color, you'll have endless colors. It's an unbelievable concept. Huh?
And no.
Right, exactly. This is he's not elaborating here right now, but this is what it says in other places. This is the meaning what he's saying here. So Atik is the expression of the divine Chad Be'etzem. It's not Atzmos either. Remember, Etzem is beyond any names. Atik is Gilui HaEtzem. It's telling you the Etzem is capable of everything. That statement already is a shleimus, so to speak. It's already saying. Arich is how that Chad Be'etzem goes into the world of Cheshbon V'lei B'chushbon. So it's endless possibilities. So really, is Atik and Arich one? They're one. But Arich is the so-called the we spoke is how Atik looks down, and Arich is how it looks back to Atik. It's like reflecting Atik into the world of existence. When you speak in Kesser, you say Kesser is the mamutza, the interface. Atik you say is netak, separate, and Arich is sheresh and netzalim. But you have to go one step further. They're both two halves of one Kesser. We said the Magid and the Baal Shem Tov were Atik and Arich. So you think about it, the Magid and the Baal Shem Tov in many ways were very similar, because they were both, their Torahs were short. You know, even though we talk about them as two generations, but really, in a way, we talk about them as one. And then came so-called Chabad, Chachma Bina Das, because Kesser is one entity, but there's two sides to it. You could think of it almost like, I'm trying to think of an example. Just as an example, it would be like a mirror. So if the mirror is facing the source, that's Arich reflecting Atik. When it faces us, it's reflecting Atik to us. That's basically how I would put it. So there you go. So that was explaining. So Hoid is Chad Be'etzem, Antu Chad V'lei B'chushbon. And then when it comes Gam Beis Pashtus, so because it's Chad Be'etzem, that's why Shagam B'ribi Madregus V'lei B'chushbon.
Yeah, I just think to myself, some is Gilim in a Etzem. So if the Etzem of Atzmos is not Bligvul or not Gvul, so he's Megala, why is it come out of Bligvul? But according to what you're saying, it sort of makes sense.
Exactly. He said it before also. When we say what we say when we say Er HaBligvul reflects God more than Er HaGvul, it's not, you have to qualify it. They're both equally godly. But Bligvul is where God doesn't use any filters. If God were to manifest in Er, it's going to be Bligvul. For there to be a Er HaGvul, God has to add additional power, which comes from Atzmos, actually from a deeper place. Think of it like a Chacham. Let's say there's an argument going on, someone who's wise is sitting and has what to say. It's easy for him to express himself, because he has what to say. It's much harder for him to exercise restraint and not speak. Because he has to then hold back something. So Bligvul is a fullest expression of divine manifestation. Not that God is Bligvul, but if he goes into the world of numbers, it's Lei B'chushbon. It has no numbers. This is a journey to some place, right?
You said
Arich and Atik, they're both quite far beyond us.
you had mentioned that if
You still not see
This
Ruchnis?
is very deep.
Yeah.
The Shulmer.
Yeah.
you had mentioned that if you went into the world of numbers, he would be the perfect number.
I'm absorbing mode.
100 is an example. It could be 1,000, but it's like a perfect round number. Yeah.
How does that fit with the idea now that he would be infinite number?
That's another form. That's in the world of numbers. It's infinite. Chlei b'chushbon. In the world of finite numbers, it's the perfect number, 100. Well, sometimes when we say 10 spheres, it means, look, shleimus. The beauty of this is like this. You know, we speak about b'chol ma'itcha. Everyone says b'chol ma'itcha, right? We say b'chol ma'itecha. So you say b'havta Hashem l'kecha b'chol vavcha b'chol nafshecha b'chol ma'itecha. So b'chol ma'itecha has all the different meanings. We should mention the meaning, of course, mamoincha, money, for those that need that. But it means might, basically. B'chol ma'it, with all of you, ma'id, with all, even beyond you. You should give all of you, and even beyond, ma'id. So Chassidus says that when you say b'chol ma'itcha, b'chol ma'itecha, means it's ma'id of yours. Your ma'id is beyond your abilities right now. Tomorrow your ma'itcha should be higher. Your ma'itcha may not be sufficient for me. If you go beyond what you've done, beyond your capacity, that's a ma'id. So the question is, what's the result of it? It says the ma'id of you, tit for tat, right? Mida connected, Mida sparks the ma'id l'mayla. That God gives you also more than you deserve, so to speak, or more than the measure that you would have gotten on your own. So Chassidus says that everybody, when they do ma'id, they get ma'id amiti. They get real bli gvul. You don't just get what's relative to you. So the question is, how is that possible? I'm doing a little, for me, a little more is not the same thing what your little more is. And yet we all get ma'id amiti because qualitatively you've gone out of your comfort zone. And that's what matters. It's not how much you've done. If someone, let's say, is given $100 tzedakah, and that's their nature, or they learn something 100 times, like he says in Tanya, and then they went 101, it's not the one. If for someone else it was 102, they went to 120, or 200 and went to 250, they all went out of their comfort zone. So qualitatively, you made a shift, and therefore you get from above a shift that's not necessarily commensurate to you. You get bli gvul amiti, basically. Why am I saying this? Because I'm trying to say is, there's no perfection in existence. But nevertheless, we try to do things as best we can. Like we say, we do a mitzvah, you say keli vanveyu, beautify a mitzvah, priyetz hader, or everything, a klaf yofa. She uses a nice parchment, you should a nice sefer Torah. Mitzvah should be, because why? What's so important? Someone will say, why is it important to beautify mitzvahs? You're doing God's will. What does He really care? Beautiful, not beautiful. It's externals, it's cosmetic. Sheker achem v'hevel ha'yefi. The answer is because who created beauty in this world? God created beauty. It's not man-made. The fact that humans abuse it or they just worship it, that's because that is like the Rabbi told the beauty queen there. Sheker achem v'hevel ha'yefi. If you don't have the second half of the pasuk. If it's just external beauty, but if Yisha Yiras Hashem Hitisalo, then because you say, how can you say Sheker Achem Avli? If you see in the Torah it says Neich Motzachem Beinov. You talk about your fast Torah, your fast Mara as a quality of the Imaz. It's not. So you could say the whole Sheker Achem. They're talking about if it's a hollow Chen and Yefi, which means what we worship, which is just external, superficial, it's Sheker. It has nothing of its own. But when we beautify a mitzvah, what we're saying is that even in the world of Gashmis, even in a world that's imperfect, we're going to do as perfect as we can. That is a manifestation of God's perfect beauty, even though we don't have perfection completely. But when God manifests in this world, it's going to be in a perfect way, in a beautiful way. So that's why Torah and Mitzvahs is not just I'm going to reach a beyond place. No, that beyond has to come into your terms, and even what you consider to be special, the most special thing. That's why Chachmaschim Benaschim Le'enei Kol Ha'amim. Why is that so important? Who cares? The nations. It's Chachma Bina, but beyond, who cares if the nations respect it? Because the real chiddush is that even in the world of nations, even in the world of Chachma Bina, even a scientist could also see here beauty. It's an unbelievable concept in the interface, because we're not just talking about escaping to God and denying the world. No, on the world's terms, we're going to show that the most beautiful possible thing is God. The most beautiful possible thing is Torah, Chassidus. That's the goal. Not just to say, oh, we have it and you guys don't have it because you're external. In your world, we'll show you whether we can be, even on your terms, we can be the best. I'm just giving you a manifest example of this. So therefore, even in the world of beauty, with all its limitations, that's why in the Beis HaMikdash we do the best. Look in the Beis HaMikdash, it said everything, not one extra thing was used. Right? There was no extra space. Every space was filled. Why in Kedusha, there's no such thing as extra. That's why the Rebbe brings about the Ayin. The Gemara says in Bava Basra that the luchas echelas, which means literally ate, but it means that they consumed the whole space, which is proof because if the luchas were round, there'd be extra space, and we know that the Ayin, the ark was square, was with right angles. So what would be with that space? And in Kedusha, you can't have extra space because what do you mean extra space? Everything is to perfection. Everything was used to perfection. I remember, I could tell you this hundreds of times, the Rebbe, the way he wrote on paper, he would write out notes. He did not use one extra piece of paper. Even till this day I do it, I'm like obsessed. He would write on back of envelopes. He would write on the page when he would edit. He'd fill in the page and not even write a little out of it. It was unbelievable how the value, like the Baal Tashchis to the extreme. You know the story with the Rebbe's pencil, right? With Rabbi Rothstein, you don't know? Oh. The Rebbe used to use pencils till they were basically, you couldn't even hold them. Because he worked mostly with a pencil, especially editing sikhs was always with a pencil. Real editors work with pencils always, because you could erase. I mean, there are times the Rebbe will use a pen, sometimes a green pen, a blue, but mostly a pencil. So once the Rebbe used the pencils, and Rabbi Rothstein, who was the Moshe Leib Rothstein, was the Rebbe's master till I think he passed away in Tafshil Chof Tes. So 69. So he couldn't deal with the Rebbe is struggling to write. So what he did was, one morning before the Rebbe came, he took away all the little pencils. There were no pencils left. And the Rebbe starts looking around for a pencil in the morning, and he's standing there, and he was a little like a sort of court jester. And the Rebbe says, "Where's another? What happened to all the pencils?" So he takes out of his pocket one of these big, cartoon, color, what are they called? Carnival pencils, those. And the Rebbe burst out laughing. He didn't have to say. The Rebbe understood exactly what he meant. So he gave. But the Rebbe, this is the ultimate, not nothing. The point I'm trying to make is that, okay, so that's the point. So Atik, this really explains, it comes into the world of Ribuy Lei B'Chushban. Here it says, like it says in the Bir Maimer Hazer. This is, usually Bir Maimer Hazer is the Biyuri Hazer of the Mittler Rebbe, and there's also the Samach Tzedek. Now, I should say, this Maimer happens to be the basis of the whole discussion of spheres from number, story, sapir, and sefer. This same Maimer. But he's using it here to explain, because that's what the end of the Maimer comes to say. After we know that spheres is number and story and brightness, he's basically saying that the ultimate sphere is no number. Why? Not because the finite reaches the infinite, but because the etzem, which is completely beyond, when it manifests in infinite numbers. And that's why later, when it comes into the world of spheres, you'll be able to reconnect. The bottom line is, all this is telling us that embedded in our existence are all these levels. That's what's going on here. It's embedded here. You don't have to go to a mountain, you don't have to escape. It's all here. V'hakol hu b'chinas ein sof. Hainu sha'asfiras ein b'chinas ein ketz. And everything is in the form of ein sof. In other words, essentially, when you're talking about this level of bleak will, everything is everything. So when you talk atzmos, you can't even call it everything. It's beyond anything. Here, now that it's manifesting in a world of things, it's everything. It's ein sof. So if you look at this level, it's the canvas, like he said, that has a potential for infinite possibilities, infinite letters, infinite expressions. They have no end and measurement in their ribuy, in their multitude. That means chad v'lei b'chushban. So next Friday, when you say Pasach Elyo, think about this. Chad, now she's one. But even in the world of numbers,
why does it express itself in bleak wool if it's in ways expression that in bleak wool not? Because we're a world of rules, so it's shlemus of the other way.
I would say the other way around. I say once it's going into the world of what's called gvul and bleak wool, it's going to be the most. Whatever it is going to be the most of. Put this level. It's like what it says in Teirah Shalom by the Alter Rebbe. We learned it that if he was in the Zman Tanoim, he would have been a Tana. If he was Zman Ameroim, he'd be an Ameira. Wherever you put this level is going to be the fullest level, and fullest bleak gvul is definitely more than gvul. That not to say gvul doesn't have its virtue, but it needs a special. God needs to put a special energy into existence for it to turn into gvul. In other words, give God a car, and it will go bleak gvul fast, basically. Unless you do something to stop it. What's the? That means Sfiris Ein Ketz. The Gam be'etzem ein b'chinas Ein Ketz. So Ein Ketz doesn't just mean in their number. They're fundamentally they're without end. So in case you could say, you know what, there's not 10 spheres, there's not 20, there's not 100, there's infinite spheres. He's saying also fundamentally, qualitatively, there's no end because it's an expression, they're in a state of Ein Sof because there is galus etzem mamish. You have the etzem is being revealed.
Any possibility too.
Look, the bottom line is like this. For us to exist there's the tzimtzum. Why is there a tzimtzum? Because if you let God loose in His, so to speak, in existence, that's it. He's going to fill the whole space up.
Overwhelming.
Now, Atzmus itself is beyond it all. Atzmus is beyond tzimtzum, beyond Gili. But we're talking about, we want an existence where there's a relationship. If there was no Seder Shtalshus, we would have no relationship with Atzmus. It would be like an entity would be here in this world, and he exists. He doesn't have to be revealed, doesn't have to be concealed. But you put Atzmus in a situation where there's manifestation, he's going to dominate. Therefore, Atzmus has to reach deeper into his own so-called bag of tricks for power of tzimtzum to conceal his own presence. See what's going on here? So there's a state of Atzmus that's beyond presence and beyond non-presence. If you're talking presence, he's going to be bligvul everywhere. So he has to bring another power in, a tzimtzum, which is even deeper, that stops his presence from manifesting in a world of presence, and that we should be able to start seeping in a gili. Look, if a teacher was fundamentally infinite, distant from us, did not have the ability to communicate on our terms, you'd be no relationship. So he has to because if the teacher just lets him, if you say, say everything you have to say, he's going to be able to speak. People will not understand anything he's saying. So the teacher is fundamentally in a different level. When he expresses himself, he would express himself in a way nobody could relate to. So in the world of expression, he has to conceal and then slowly start revealing, spoon feeding it, step by step by step. I mean, it's clear to me, to some extent. Is it not clear?
So the world where he has
the Inyan who
in the world of infinite, is that between Hod and Hadar, in between?
No. Hadar is the like you said, Hadar is the manifestation in the world of spheres, so it's infinite spheres. And Hod is just the being Chad Be'etzem, that you're calling him oneness. Like I said, I think you could really say it's two sides of one coin. There's the so-called the Pshitus Atzmos, the total oneness. And then you say, how does that oneness, the other side of it is infinite possibilities. That's the key thing here. There's a beautiful mimer from the Mittler Rabbi said, I have to go back because he explains it very, very beautifully, this idea. Where is it? Yeah, some above. Huh? No, but the Mittler Rebbe is Hanocha. It's very interesting where he talks about exactly these two things in a very powerful way. He asked the question, he says, either is going to be totally one or it's going to be infinite. How is it possible that it should be in between? Some structure. Because if God expresses himself, it's either infinite possibilities or everything is one. Total oneness. I think that's No, the answer is because there's a ratzon for that. But I'm saying, naturally, so to speak. Remember, again, I always have to qualify. God doesn't need any of this. There's no such thing as naturally. But He created a world where it makes sense. And in a world of sense, we need to have this type of structure. There's no other way to connect. Because Bligvul is Bligvul and God is God. So you need to have this type of... I think it's an unbelievable concept. You see creative people, by the way, there's no such thing as a limit to their creativity. It's not like they run out of ideas. A creative person is just, the Mayim is Gaber. You open up and it just goes. You ever see the Rebbe, the Plonk Fabrengens? It's endless. If there was no limit of time, I could see the Rebbe talking till now, and always having more to say. You can see it's a yam. It's like it's a sea, and on, hours. So what is going on? It's not because he has a lot to say. It's because he's an atzmi. And atzmi open up in words, and it's endless words.
Yeah, wow.
Unless he stops himself.
That's why this is such a big sefer.
Yeah, this is very similar to this. It's
If the Rebbe Shabbos still here writing, he's still writing it. It'd be the volume.
What's the expression? What's the expression in Tefillah we say? That if you gave me an ink and pen, I would write and not end up writing. Right, exactly. That's the idea. That even in the world, it also explains an interesting Gemara. The Gemara says in Brachos that if someone sees a rei uchlusa, uchlusa is 600,000 people. You have to make a bracha baruch hacham harazim. Rashi says, what does that mean? Baruch means a blessing for the wise one of secrets. So Rashi says, because someone that sees 600,000 is able to be sevel, is able to contain 600,000 different types of people, that's a chacham harav. Not everybody. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not just he's seeing 600,000. It means he's relating, because most of us can relate to 2, 3, 5 people. How many people?
So we can never make this back off, actually.
You can make it if you see the person is like that. Yeah. But the point my point is, when we have friends, we may have different types of friends, but they're usually going to fit into a few categories, which fit our personality. Why? Because if you're a Rebbe, you would choose a certain type of people that you can work with. You're not going to choose everyone, because there's different adjectives we can use for certain people that you don't necessarily want in your camp. But Moshe Rabbeinu is in the Neshama Klolos. Whoever comes by, he can handle. Not just tolerate. He's able to, because there's a certain element that's beyond everything, and therefore he can be with everyone completely. Well, we're defined by our tzir. So when you find your nitfis in your tzir, as it's called, so your tzir is a certain shape. Okay, you have latitude for a certain amount of people. But you're not inviting everyone to your party. And the Rebbe will invite everyone to the party. But Rabbi Sachs says, first pulpit, when his first sermon he ever gave, the first night when he became rabbi in England, so he gave credit to the Rebbe because the Rebbe encouraged him to become a rabbi. So afterwards, a woman came over to him and said to him, "What's the difference between a Rebbe and a rabbi?" She said, "You saw it here tonight. When a rabbi speaks, he could be speaking to 500 people, and everybody thinks he's speaking to someone else. And a Rebbe he could be speaking to 5,000 people, and everyone thinks he's speaking to him." That was what he said. It's an interesting, nice word, huh? That's the difference. Like, when the guy speaks, he says, in his own elbows, my class, sometimes I say something, so I see a wife elbowing her husband. That's you. Okay, good.
Chad v'loy b'chushbon is one level or 2 levels? It's chad and then v'loy b'chushbon, or it's chad and then v'loy b'chushbon?
And if I tell you both are right, what would you say? Atik and arich. Does that help you? I don't know what you see when you say the word level. You have to define what you mean level. You mean like first floor and second floor, right? You don't mean that, right? So you mean it's 2 dimensions. It's two qualitative levels. Let me ask you, 1 and 2. The number 1 and the number 2 are 2 levels in your mind. You could say they're 2, but they're also the same numbers. 1 goes to 2. This is essentially, think of it like you have an idea. You just asked me a question, right? The second before you asked the question, you thought of it, and then you said it. When you said it, is it a different level than when you thought it? The answer is yes or no. It's a different level because it's another step of expression. No, because it's the same thing in your thought. You just expressed yourself. I would say it's like that. This is an expression of a level that's there. But you have to understand levels. Here we're talking here, everything is very conceptual here, very theoretical. But you could apply, you can use examples. Look, the mile of all this, the reason we can relate to these ideas, even if we don't fully get it, is because everything in existence is a process. I just gave you an example. There's no such thing as an idea that doesn't go through a process. You have an idea, you find words, you express it. You argue, you ask questions. You love, you have a feeling of love, you go and express it. Everything begins with a concept, a seed, it develops and blossoms into a life, a tree. So we have examples of a same state that's going through stages. This is really the way you should apply this. It's almost like a birthing taking place. How does the birthing start from Atzmos? Obviously it's not in time, it's happening right now, but it's a relationship. When you understand this process, you can then relate. The question is what stage you're relating to. The big question, if you really want to ask, is what's Negei L'Peil and Aveda this level of Hayd and Hadar? How would we apply it in our lives today? So that I addressed a bit yesterday when what was his name? Greenbaum. Yeah, he's a psychiatrist. And also we'll learn more about it. We'll learn there's no such thing as a level that doesn't have an Afkamina and Aveda. Everything is relevant. Okay, so let's continue, and we'll maybe after this chapter we'll see where we still have a few things to go through here. Okay.
There's always another chapter.
Yeah, there's always another chapter.
There's always another chapter. So.
You guys.
And when you end, it's maskifim haschol lashlam. You have to start again. So there's no such thing as ending. It's like a song. The Rebbe once by Fabrein, talk about Ein Sof. The Rebbe was once at Fabrein. I think it went till almost 5 in the morning. I think it's on tape. One of the Purim, and it was like, after so many hours, it's like almost you could not continue going forever. So the Rebbe smiled at the end of Fabrein and says, "So now we'll take a little hefsek between one Fabrein and the next." So I learned from that everything is one Fabrein. It's just a matter. There's little breaks. Right now we're on an 18-year break since the last Fabrein, or 20-year break, I would say. So that's a way of looking at things.
But then I've also saved the wine from them.
The hefsek been cut. Hefsek, yeah.
No? And we saved the wine from it's one long Fabrengen.
That's correct. Yem shekulei mashke. You just need a little refueling. That's the only thing, right? You can't last on the fuel, but you can try. Right, and the Revach itself becomes part of the Parshas. The Rebbe once said, Moshe Rabbeinu needed a Revach. Look at it. So said, when you have a teacher like David, did you need a Revach? They say by Yaakov something like that. There's some example. It's all relative who you're talking to. Okay. The Ayin in this is that we explained. Now we explained earlier in chapter 101. You see here he's now really bringing all the chapters in. So there we explained it was in the story. It was sfira from the word sipur. So he said the story is 2 stages. Someone tells you a story. There's a story they tell you. They're revealing to you. Let's say someone tells you a story from the old days in Russia, or whatever story. So they're revealing something you didn't know. A chapter in history, a chapter of their lives, a feeling, filling in. Then they also reveal to you through Yediyas Hashlili. It says the story also tells you learn from you extrapolate. You say, from what he said, I learn what he didn't say. Like between the lines. So it's called Yediyas Hashlili. That, like you're saying, let's say you say someone tells you God is a Chacham. Okay, I hear the story now. I realize that if he's a Chacham, he's a far different Chacham than we know what Chacham is. So he said, Shlila is another stage, Mevin Dover, Metech Dover. That was the words that he used. So he's using this now to explain like this. The Yediyas Hashlila, the Shem Chacham Be'ein Sof, when you say the negative deduction, we call it, of Shem Chacham Be'ein Sof. So what do we say? Chacham v'loy b'chakim b'yediyah. Hurak lishul lahepach mezeh. It's only to negate the opposite of Chacham. It's not telling you what it is. It's only to negate. It's not Chacham as what you think wisdom is. He's not. One second. In other words, it's not telling you he's beyond wisdom altogether. He's saying the wisdom you think it is, it's not. Meaning it is wisdom. Only thing is, it's not. It's mushal. It's what do we say? It's not. It negates completely the wisdom as it is in Seder Shtalshus. So when someone says to you, okay, did you understand the idea we just learned about, let's say, Atik? Say, well, whatever you understood, it's not that. But that doesn't mean it's not that you're out of the ballpark. You're on a different league. It means what you understand wisdom is, that's not God's wisdom. But it's still wisdom. That's really Yediyas Hashlila. Remember we learned in the previous chapter that in Atik you don't have Yediyas Hashlila like that. Atik doesn't even have that. So let's go back to what I said about beauty. If I see a beautiful thing in this world, if someone takes a Pri Eitz Hadar, or they do a mitzvah with beauty, or you saw the Rebbe walked like a king. I remember then, just as a small side, when my father printed after Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka pictures of the Rebbetzin, so he got it over his head Friday night, or the Spitz Chabad, how could you print pictures like that? So he says, what kind of Rebbetzin? You want a Rebbetzin that looks like one of these shmatas in I don't want to say which neighborhood he said, He says, yeah, our Rebbetzin was beautiful. Says, yeah, they want them, for them, beauty doesn't belong in the realm of a Rebbetzin. Because their beauty is mushka's dika beauty. In other words, when you see something beautiful in this world, like we say in the Sifri, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, Lasu Kadesha Tev Al Yotcha. You know, the Medrash says, what means to love God? Interesting definition in Medrash. Not that love God, that you should make God beloved. That anyone sees you and says, wow, that's a godly person, that will make me love. That's called Kiddush Hashem. You see someone behave in a refined way, you could say a human being can make a Kiddush. God is beyond anything. How could you, a little human being, with just saying hello to someone or saying good morning, make a Kiddush Hashem? Yeah, because what you're doing is taking God, and in your world, even your limited world, you behave beautifully. That's the whole idea. So, I could say it's Shlei Berach. What's our Chanun compared to God? Our compassion to someone is limited. And that's Bli Gvul beyond? No. Because when God manifests, that's how it looks. And you have to do the best you can do in your part. That's the idea. So then what do you come from that? Someone says, okay, you behave beautifully, now I can understand the beauty of God. You know, I ever said the story here, when I went to Australia, Melbourne, 12 or 15 years ago, so, and the Reisenberg Rabbi Reisenberg drove me. So when he sent me, before I went, he said to me, you're going to meet a lot of people here, but one person especially, I want you to keep your eyes out. There's a writer. He's a very, very popular writer, very famous writer here. He's Jewish, but he considers himself an atheist. And I gave him your book a few months ago, knowing that you're coming. And he read it, and he told me that I asked him, how'd you like the book? He says, great book. I have it by my nightstand. I read it every night. So Reisenberg said to me, I asked him, so you start believing in God? You know, because so he says, no. But let me tell you this, if God was like the Rebbe, I'd believe in God. Those were his words. So when I met him actually in Sydney, because I was one Shabbos in Melbourne, one Shabbos in Sydney. How did I meet him? He was by a breakfast, a Friday morning breakfast. He comes over to me. As I was talking, I realized who he was. And I could see, he said he was a journalist, a writer, he read my book, you know. So I didn't, without missing a beat, I said to him, so how do you know God's not like the Rebbe? You know, that's the follow-up question. So he said, you know why? Because the Rebbe would never have allowed the Holocaust. So I tell the story, I said, pretty good for atheists. Everyone should have such discussions. God's good, huh? The Rebbe would never have allowed the Holocaust, based on what I see from the Rebbe. So I say to myself, it's very unbelievable. He's right. I mean, good. It's not a question on God, obviously. But what's the point? That when I use the story many times. People say, "What's a Rebbe exactly? What are you worshiping a Rebbe?" So I said, "No, we're worshiping not a Rebbe. We're looking on earth, and we see a human being that's aligned himself. And when you look at him, you say, "This is what I would want to be. This is what godliness looks like on this earth. Not God, godliness. This is a person who's ready to refine himself to that extent, where every step he makes is a Kiddush Hashem. And when you look at him, this is what you see as being the best of a human being. That's called, that's what this guy was saying, basically. So just in a Holocaust, no one who knew the Rebbe would not imagine that the Rebbe was asked, but there should be a Holocaust would say yes. Right? It's hard to imagine that. Yeah. That's why maybe the Eibishter had to hide it from tzaddikim, because they would not agree. Something like that. Again, we're not going into God's mysteries. Obviously, there's something here. Yeah, right, exactly. That's why I'm referring to. So, bottom line, I want to say is like this. So, Arich, what he's saying now is like this. What he's saying is, okay, we're going to spell it out. But Yediyas HaShlila is saying like this. What you see, okay, you see beautiful now? Now you know this is what God is like. You say, what God is like, this beauty? No. God is not like this beauty, but this is an example of what beauty is. And now you know that God is beautiful, but He's not beautiful like you understand it. So you now go to a next step. But we're not saying God is not beautiful, or God doesn't have this smile. It's just the way you understand the mila, because you're a limited human being. You understand it's this big, and the truth is it's far, far beyond that. So Yediyas HaShlila, in the Kuta Teira, he says, from enough Yediyas HaShlila, you can come to Mamish, Kamoi. I said, what's the example he uses? The words he uses, from a lot of Yediyas HaShlila, from extrapolating enough, you can come almost to Yediyas HaChiyuv. If there's enough Shlila. In other words, like someone could say,
together enough.
Right, exactly. Like let's say this table was invisible and you couldn't see it.
So nice.
But you start bouncing things off it. Exactly. After a while, you can get a visual that's almost like the thing. So conceptually, it's also that way. That's why it's hard. That's why I say it's so important for us to get beyond our limited, narrow view from time and space, because that traps you from going anywhere. Yidiyas Ashlila. Maybe that's the whole basis of Gemara. That's why we argue all the time. You think you know it? No. The pasuk zet azay. So it's forcing us to go out of chiyuv into shlila. What do you think? And then you go to get a deeper understanding of it, because you come back and say, 1 second, but I have an argument this way, back and forth. Slowly, you get a picture that's far bigger than the original picture. Because if everyone just agreed with each other, well, you have a limited picture. That's pretty good. I think that's good. You get a bigger picture that way. Huh? No. I think. No, I'm talking about arguments of as vav besufa, where the intention is good. You have a lot of people's minds being put together. You're going to get a far better picture of the picture than one person himself. It's always that way. Okay, so that's Yidusha. So what do you say? So now he's saying Yidusha. Hurak lishla hepach mazev. Im kein zeh chachma rak shamush lo legamre b'chinas hachachma d'seder shtalos. V'chein shem yachol. The same thing with the name Yachol, like Shem Chacham. Yachol, he could, he's able. Ukahai Gavna. So the same thing is, what means Yachol? You say God is able to do something. So you say, what does that mean? So let's just speak to a child or to ourselves. I'm able to right now lift up this table. God could also lift up this table. And you say, well, that's God's ability. You say, no. You know that he's able to do a lot more. What you think is able is not the ability of God, but it's still a capability. You follow? And we learned there and discussed it. The calls in Madreg Sof. That's not a level in Ein Sof. Kim hu haflos Ein Sof Baruch Hu. That's not Ein Sof itself, because Ein Sof itself is beyond Shlila. This is the hafla of Ein Sof. In other words, you're saying, what are you saying? I could lift up a ton. All of us can lift up 100 tons. We can build monuments. And God can do a lot more than that. More than that. Everything we can do is not describe what He's able. He's able, but not in what we think is able. It's something we can't even envision. But it's in the world of ability. That's hafla of Ein Sof. That's like the grandeur. That we are all wise, and God's wisdom is beyond our wisdom. So you're learning the hafla of Ein Sof. It's not Ein Sof itself, it's the grandeur, as we discussed that. It's the hafla, it's the grandeur, it's the grandiosity, the majesty of the divine wisdom and divine ability. Etc.
So what's made Eina Madregas?
I think he's saying not Etzema Er. In other words, you're not getting. Shlila is just telling you how. I think. Let's see a few lines. I think that's what I have to go back to that chapter because he probably used that expression. But I think that's what he was saying, that there's a level that remains beyond.
Beyond that flow.
Yeah. Yeah?
I'm going to a museum now.
You're going where?
To a museum.
You're going to the museum? Very nice. Good. Welcome to my children. These are, as I said, two products of Lifnei Tzimtzum. They haven't yet been corrupted into our world, so you have a little taste of. That's how I look at it. I read Ayin Beis, I look at them, I get a little taste, then we go back down to earth. Back on your heads, you know? After the coffee break. I think that's what he's saying, but let's see. And explain this. Yashlema, we can say it's al derech mashkos makam al pishita she'eres heim pshutim legamri. Okay. He's going to explain it according to the shita that the eres. Now remember, this drush, this hemshech, is according to the opinion that the shita that. Let me just explain what he's saying. He doesn't let go. He doesn't give us any breathing room. It's relentless. It's like one wave after another, you know. As we discussed, the stages of the energies of the flow goes like this. The etzem, we talked etzem ha'er hoid atik. Spashtus ha'er is hadar. We talked about sphere saying ketz. You know, in loy b'chushban, type of like infinite possibilities, etc. But there's the next level. This is still the shadish, the root of air blikvul, seira seviv. You're still talking transcendent energy. The next step is when God says, I want energy that's going to speak to the containers. That's going to enter the faculties. That's going to enter the containers. And here there are two opinions what type of energy that is. Is it like Eir HaBli, just now diminished so it can fit into containers? For example, what example would that be? Pure white liquid or pure clear liquid in colored glasses. So the liquid is the same liquid before it got into the glass. It's Eir HaBli, except now God is saying you fit into Chochmah Bina, but the Eir does not change at all. Its quality is the same as Eir Bli Gvul, but it's not Eir HaBli. It is Eir's Gvulim now. But the Gvul is not in the Eir, the Gvul is that the Eir fits into the container. Or, and that's the opinion in this Hemshech, the Eir itself assumes a property of Chochmah and Bina. However, relative to the container, it's still unshaped. So, in other words, the liquid itself already has a color, so to speak. But it's revealed through the containers. That's what he explained, like Shammai and Hillel. When they heard from Shmaya Vavtayan, it wasn't just a pure idea they heard, and then this one decided it's chesed, lenient, and this one said stringent. In the idea, you have already both possibilities. Now, his container were gvura, so he took it this way. And the proof of that is, because sometimes you find Shammai is lenient. How's that possible? That means that because the energy itself has chesed, he can go back to the idea and derive from it a lenient version. So the idea has within it, except it's more amorphous. Now I discussed this at length, the difference between the opinions, but the Hemshech here is talking according to opinion 2, which obviously makes the unity of the interface stronger. Because if the energy has in it also the code language of the container, their connection is deeper. If the energy, on the other hand, doesn't have it, what you have is more elokus, more pshittus. So now he's bringing a proof to understand the levels of Eir HaBli. He's going now into Eir HaGvul. Well, let's put Eir Pnimi, I would say. It's not really Eir HaGvul, it's Eir. That's now, we're now, not so we talked here, we said like this, the Eir Atzmi is Chad Be'etzim, it's oneness. Then there's a canvas, a parchment that's white light, infinite possibilities, infinite ways of making art. Now he arose in his will, Shir Atzmi, Allah B'Ritzeinei, he wants a world, and Shir Atzmi, and he envisioned now 10 spheres on this infinite light. Basically, Eish Chera and Eish Levena. Now darkened ink on top of a white parchment. These are 10 letters, they're called 10 spheres. The energy in these spheres, are they energy that's gligvul or pshitus, or do they have also some 10? And the Hemshech here, he's saying that even the energy has 10. And the other opinion that he's going to speak now about is says the energy here in the 10 letters, not in the parchment for sure is gligvul. The 10 letters is also retains an element of pshitus. Now, at the end of the day, Chassidus explains that even that opinion, also the fact that it can go into the glass and Bligvul can go in, is already a sign that it has something. And the opinion that holds that it has seer in it, you have to say also has pshittas. So the real difference at the end of the day, the argument is a subtle one, because they both are going into containers. It's just a question in Aveda would be like, what do you make more focus on? When you say Hashek L'Shan B'Shvei Sivan L'Hadlik Ner Chanukah, is the focus on Ner Chanukah from the Eir? Or is the focus on Hashek L'Shan B'Shvei Sivan, so to speak? In other words, is it on Kavanah Klolis or Kavanah Pratis? So that's really the difference is just a matter of how. In other words, you go crazier over the Digduk Kal of every shear when you eat matzah, or you're focusing more on the so-called the Eir Poshet within it. You get the idea. So now he's going to bring an example to understand. So to understand this, according to that shita, when you say Eira Chochmah, the wisdom of the energy of Chochmah, the energy of Bina, you're not saying the energy is Chochmah and Bina. The Eir Be'etzim will Poshet. The energy is Poshet. The Ein Loich Yichus. It has no relationship. Ela Chochmah Yesem Ela Bina. It doesn't have any leaning, any more connection to Chochmah than it has to Bina. Rak she'er hu oris ha'maitzil baruch hu lahaitzel sfiras ha'chochmah. So then why you call it Eir HaChochmah? Because the energy is a reflection of the emanator, of the source, to emanate the sfiras ha'chochmah shihi ha'kli. So Chochmah means the container is the Chochmah. Why you call it energy? Because this is the energy that's been designated, you go here. So let's put it this way, you have 10 cups. This one's Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed. Now you're pouring liquid, the same liquid in all of them. But who's telling this liquid to go here, this? So the Maitzl is saying, number 1, you go into cup 1, number 2. But the itself could have gone into Bina as it went into Chachma. So that's what's going on here. You have to say there's ultimately a relationship because he's telling this one to go here. But the fact of the matter is, you're really talking about Eres Pshutim. It's not. And when the Sfiras HaChachma, meaning the container, is emanates, the energy that manifests and encloses in it to give it life, then it's called Eir HaChachma. So once the cup takes the colorless liquid and the cup that's, let's say, color, so now it's called Eir HaChachma. This is the energy of this cup that's called Chachma, basically. Al Shem HaKli. It's called on the name of the Kli. In other words, the Kli gives it a name, doesn't have a name of its own. It assumes the name of the container that it is manifesting in. Because this has now made a color, it's colored and shaped the light. Because when someone looks at it now, they don't see bligvul. You now see a red or blue or yellow or green or even white liquid. If someone didn't know, they'd say maybe the liquid is colored. How do I know? So from the perspective of the recipient, the energy has been colored, even though has no color and it's the same color as like the energy in Bina and so on. Remember, Eir HaBligvul, on the other hand, it doesn't even have this energy because Eir HaBligvul is not even written letters on the parchment yet. So there's no color at all. V'gam zeh, and he goes now further. Ein nikne ba'er. Even though it's colored the glass, it's colored the liquids, it's colored the energy, but ein nikne ba'er. It's not really internalized. Nikne, how do you say nikne? It's not been acquired. But nikne is like a kinyan. It's ein nikne. It's not. It doesn't become the property. It's not altered the property of the energy of the light. Rakshanirikain. Only it looks that way. Ba'er. Al derech moshel hamayim shemishtam lefigeven hakeli keneda. Like the example of water that changes according to the color of the container as it's known. So that's an example. According to this, the energy that sustains and brings into existence Chachma could have brought into existence Bina. It's not commensurate. Remember, we spoke about the faculties. The power of vision goes into your eye, not into your ear. Here he's saying no, because the energy is shapeless. It could have created. It could have brought into being Bina. The Chachma could have also created Bina. Because of the shapelessness of the energy on its own, it doesn't have a relationship to Chachma more than to Bina. And it could be that the same energy itself should create Bina and manifest in it. The only thing is, after the fact, circumstantially, basically, since after the Chachma was created and in the container and it manifests, that's when it's in the level of Chachma. Canal, meaning that it looks like that. In other words, two steps here. That's when it's a state of Chachma. But also that is not really nikna. It's not in it. It doesn't assume the property. It just looks like that. But fundamentally, it could have created Bina. And had it been in Bina, it would have looked like Bina. It would have looked like another color.
Could you say retroactively after it goes in the Keli, that once it goes in the Keli, you could say that it had some sort of shaykhus for Chachma, and once it had been...
Yeah, there's a discussion. Absolutely. But you see here, but because according to this opinion it's pshutim, you have to say it always remains apart. It always remains apart. You could give examples in the halacha of it, like when you, like I mentioned before about kavana pratis, kavana klolis. I have to find an example, but there are examples where, example of Shabbos, I mentioned already. Hametzi eichel pachas mikashir, in a clay that has a shear. So you don't go according to the keli, you go according to the eir. So you see there that the keli does not shape the eir. I mean, that's an example, but I don't know if that's a perfect example. You have to say that there's something. Look, in this another Maimorim, he speaks about, according to this Shita, what's the difference between the air the way before the higher level and then when it goes in. So you have to say there's something going on. Something is telling Chachma to go here. It's not just an accident. But at the same time, even as it goes, what he's focusing on the other side, even when it goes, it retains its so-called an exit clause. It's an exit strategy here.
Would you say it's individuality, it's original shittas?
Yeah. It's negei in Achdus Hashem at times. It retains that element. According to the other shita, it does not retain it. But as I said, the difference is going to be not such, it's more subtle than it sounds. It's not like, because the other opinion doesn't hold that it's red going into a red container either. It has in it a tchuna, whatever, something is in there. And what you're saying is correct. This is how it is before it enters the container and after the container.
You see, neshama gets affected by guf after it enters in the guf.
Well, neshama b'guf is not pshutim. That's the fact.
Neshama is not pshutim.
Because the kayach hadiyah goes into the eye. That same kayach would not go into the ear. It's not like one energy just going into different containers. There's many proofs for that. But you also have another example. Let's say sometimes liquid sits into something and it starts actually assuming its properties after a while.
Yeah.
You also have that. It's not always, you let it sit there too long and it starts becoming like it. Yeah. And Allah for sure, and kashrus and things like that. Time is a factor, yeah. Like overnight or something. Also kind of food and drink, yeah. Look, at the end of the day, it's all levels. You have both. V'im kain. Now 1 second. Now this is all to explain Eidin Seif HaBligvul. V'im kain, if that's the case, Mekol shkein sheyesh leim rekein be'Eidin Seif HaBligvul. If even the Eidis Pshutim, even the Eidis Pnimim, that go into the containers, retain their so-called lack of identity. Right? Then for sure in the Eidin Seif HaBligvul, in the infinite parchment, Sha'eru b'chinas pshitas mamish. Here it says the mamish, not relative. There it's mamish pshitas because it doesn't even have it can't even enter into any containers. It can't even turn into letters. Is there a din in Safrus that before the Sefer starts writing, I mean, I know what he says, that there's like a state before he's actually writing the letters, there's some type of like Kavona Klolis, he's going to be writing a Sefer Taylor or a Mezuzah. In other words, the shame what? No, I'm trying to say, is there a point where he says to himself, I'm writing all the letters, like, I'm not writing just a letter, it's going to be part of like almost intentionally saying that when I start writing, even though I'm not finishing today, I'm writing it till the kavanah is to finish it all. There has to be, because
you have an own expression.
He has to do it all the time. You can't just do it once.
Yeah, but the fact is, if it can't sit all the time and write. So he has a kavanah that I'm starting now, al manas. Is there something like that? Does he have to have such a kavanah? Because it would be a good example of, before he starts writing, he's having all the letters in mind, and then comes the actual kavanah, aleph beis. I'm just thinking out loud. Okay, so kolshken edus of habligvul had eine beged b'chinas chachma bina is definitely not in the category. By the way, you don't have to do that. It's a fine. Yeah, it's not in the category of chachma bina. V'im came masha ana eimim shum kol mokem chacham v'yachol. Now, just talk about the idea of shlila, and therefore, when we say that he's nevertheless a chacham and a yachol, he's a chacham and a yachol, and he's capable. She says chacham b'chachma v'yachol b'bina. Chacham is wisdom is in chachma v'yachol. He's not talking about yechelis here. Clearly, he's talking about an ability like bina. So the same energy that's in chachma, we're talking about Eir HaBligvul, is also in yechelis. Because in Eir Sof there's no containers. And that means that you can't say it's this and not that, chiyuv, in a directory. You can only negate. Meaning that they're not at all any personality or substance at all. I'm not clear what he's saying here. The whole thing began by saying that Shlila is only being Shel say he's not wise like we know wisdom. But he's wise in his own way. Okay, I understand. Okay, but then there's a higher level of Eid Ein Sof itself. That's only the flaw. There's Eid Ein Sof itself where that you can't even say that he's not wise. There you're saying he's wise. In Arich you're saying he's wise, but he's not wise like us. He's infinitely wise. Like I said, infinite numbers. But in the level of Chad Be'etzem, you can't even say that. That's what he's saying here. In Atik you can't say that. Like here, and the Kal V'chemer is from Eresh Pshutim, because even on the lower level, you going now? Okay, you going to have fun? You going to go to the museum? Very nice. Okay. You can't even say that. You can't say he's not wise like we. He's not even calm together. And the Kal V'Chem is Pashut. Because even on the lower level, you can't even call it Chachma. It's only because it entered a container. So here for sure you can't. 1 second. So would you say Yediyas HaShlila by Eretz Pshutim? So you could say it like this. It's Shlila. Like when you say the air that enters into Chachma, according to the opinion that's Pshutim, you could say Shlila, like Arich. You could say it's not Chachma like the container, but it has some Chana. You can't even say it has any Chachma. That's what he's saying. It has no Chachma. Even Shlila is not, even, there's no Shlila even in Eretz Pnimim. Wow.
It's not applicable to Pshutim, the concept of Shlila. Can you really use Shlila by Pshutim? Wow,
depends which level of Pshutim. There's relative Pshutim and there's extra. You see, you can't even say Shlila there. That's what he's saying. You can't say Shlila, right? Where according to the opinion, according to this Hemshech, not what he's saying here. You could say that Eir is Shlila. That's what you could say. That's what it is. That's a very beautiful way of putting it. Remember we said what's the difference between Eir and Keli according to the opinion that Eir does have image? Shlila. That Eir has Chachma in it, but it's not Chachma like the container. According to the Pshutim, you can't even say Chachma, even negate it. That's what he's saying. Okay. Follow what I just said.
You want to say the Shlila itself is the Metzias of the
according to the opinion of Eretz Mitziyarim, you can say it's Shlila. It's a Shlila of the Keli.
That's how it looks.
Yeah. No, not just that it looks. That's what it is. Not in this opinion, not here.
I know.
But here he's saying, so we bring down a So even Eretz Pnimim, you can't say Shlila. So here, so you can't say V'zeu she'enim b'chinas chiv kim b'chinas Shlila. So if that's the case, the same energy that's in the level of Chachma is exactly the same thing as in Yechelis and Bina, basically, in ability. Meaning that this infinite light, that's Mufla b'chinas HaChachma, That's it? V'zeu she'einu b'chinas midri, right. V'zeu she'einu b'chinas madrege bein and sof ki im haflos ein sof be'in ha'chochma v'yechelis. So this means that it's not a level in the divine light, it's only the haflah of the divine in the way in chochma and yechelis.
So the haflah is lower?
Looks like it.
Basically means that they're not level, they're not different distinct levels. They're just the whole A is our plus, is our flaw.
What time is it?
11.
It's a little complicated here. I think he's saying. Let me read it. Let's read to the end. And fundamentally, it's the shapelessness of Atzim is the way he is. And this is the meaning that the spheres in the infinite light are without an end. They're fundamentally Ein Sof. The in Asfira Surak is Galus Atzmus Mamish. And the Sfira here is only that it's the revelation of Atzmus Mamish, of the core itself. And therefore it's in this type of shapelessness of the infinite light. And then he says in the parentheses, Teichana Inyan Hanal, Hu de Kamoiba Er Pnimi. He's summarizing it now. Because you see, it's complicated. The Rebbe Rashab is summarizing it. He says the content of what we just said, not the Kitzur, he's saying this in the Pnim, is that just like an air Pnimi, Lashita Shu B'chinas P'chinas Mamish, what I just said, that even an internalized energy, according to the opinion that it's shapeless energies, Kedim Shemahavas HaKelim, before they create and shape the containers, Chenu Ba'er Ein Sof, the same thing as an Eir Ein Sof in the Bligvul, Gam Kamesha Ano Emrim Ba'eshu Hu Chacham V'Yachol. Also the way we say that it is Chacham and able. Because it doesn't come into containers. He says, okay, this helps. This parenthesis is a key parenthesis. I got it. One second, let me just sum it up before the Kitzur. I think I didn't say it exactly right. Remember, we're talking here about a level, Hadar, Arich, that is already manifesting in called Sfiras brightness. But it doesn't have the shape of Sfiras. It's Pshitas. He says it's Mamish ain't safe like the core. Right? 1 second. So he's saying like this: even if you were to say that this level has in it the potential for Chacham and Bina, you have to say from the proof from the Eresh Pshutim that's on a lower level that it does not really have a shape and form.
That's what I said. After the it comes into the
Post
Keli.
facto, retroactive.
What you said before. After the it comes into the Keli, it's the same way.
We said that. That's for sure. It's the same way. No, that's not what. No. They're confusing me.
The Keli doesn't change the head.
But you're talking about. I'm not. That's what I'm talking. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the Eir HaBlikvul now, not the Eir. It's only a raya. So he's saying that even when you say, the question is there shlila there. What I'm concerned with, I'm not clear here. Where is there shlila? Is there a negated thing in atik, in arich? And atik there's nothing to negate because it's beyond completely. Or even in arich you can't negate anything because it's on a different level. That's what I'm not clear about. See what I'm asking? Because first it's appeared to me that he was saying, the previous chapter he said, the Yudis HaShlil you can say in Arich, but you can't say it in Atik. And now he went on to say that
Even in that.
You can't say it in Arich either. But that's after
you can't say it in Arich either. Proof is that even on a lower level you can't say it because the Eir never assumes the properties of the Kalim. Even Eir is Pnimium. So for sure, Eir HaBlikvul doesn't assume the properties. So if it doesn't assume the properties, you can't say negate. But he's saying, but then he says, when we say on this level that he's a chacham and he's able, we're not really mean that. We don't even mean shlila. We mean that he's completely beyond because the same power that gives chachma can give bina. That means pshitas. He's essentially also bringing that you can't say Yidish HaShlila in Arich. That's what it looks like to me. It began a little differently, but I think that's where he's ending up. Need to have a bit on this. I got to think it through. There's the hafla and there's the Erein Sof itself. Huh?
Why is he going to follow to this shita, which he's not actually signing?
First of all, the shita is a true shita, and no matter what. Secondly, the shita is a emes shita. So, and the tzvaris are emes. So, according to that shita, it helps us understand. If he was going to go now explain the shita that it's mitziyarim, he won't. He wants to make a point that Eir HaBlikvul is really beyond everything. Even according to the shita, it's mitziyarim. Yeah, but you understand it better according to the shita of pshutim because it's a kolshkein then. In other words, according to the shita of mitziyarim, you could say the Eir HaBlikvul is something like the shita of pshutim in the Eir HaPnimim, but it's not exactly, obviously. Right. What I can't figure out is exactly where the shlila stops and where you still have something. There's something in the words haflav and seif and erein sof, like you pointed out. I have to read it again. Okay, but at least we get the picture here. Bottom line is that they're spheres, but they're einkets, and they're fundamentally different because they're in a state of pshitas of atzmus. So it's really a revelation. So all we know about God's personality, when we say God is a wise one and all that, Eidus and Kelim and Atzilus, you can talk in Eif and Chiyuv. Then there's a place where you have to say he's not Chakim v'lei b'chachmi yediyah. Then there's a place where you can't even say that. It's all God's power, and wherever that power manifests, it's a chachma. He's going to be perfect chachma. It's going to be beauty, perfect beauty. Sfiras ein sof. That type of. I think that's what he's really trying to say here. That when he manifests, it manifests in a pshitas way. The thing was, I thought that so that means shlila is even a lower level than that.
It's based on the pattern of the way the goes, the way the Rebbe Shach goes. He always does that. He goes, I'll go higher and higher than even in hay and higher.
Yeah. So let's read the Kitzur. We'll go over it again. Maybe the next chapter will clarify. Kitzur v'zer sheshach sfiras gam be'erein sof. Maybe the summary will help. The Kitzur. And this is the meaning that there's sfiras possible in the infinite light. She'oin behirus. That's the brightness. Gilui ha'etzem reveals the core. Shezeo davke be'erein sof. That's precisely, specifically in the infinite light. Because the other light already has some type of shape, some type of definition. And because it's the extension of this dimension, arich, in other words, you could say spheres. Except they're ad ein ketz, meaning infinite spheres, and at the core, qualitatively, they're They're Ein Sof. They have no shape and form. Ha'inyan hu de la shita de is prutim legamri ha'era ma'itzel es ha'chochma yochel ha'itzel sabina. According to the opinion that the energies are completely shapeless, the energy ha'er ha'ma'itzel, the energy that emanates wisdom, chochma, could also emanate bina. So definitely this is the case in the infinite divine light that Ein Sof, that is mufla, beyond. That he's grandeur, he's majestic, he's exalted in the level of Chachma. He's not saying mufla mibchinas, he's saying mufla bibchinas. He's also wondrous in the level of hayechelis. In other words, it's a certain equality going on in the haflaw. It's the haflaw of it, yeah. That's the haflaw. Right, he's bringing out the pshitis. In other words, it doesn't really matter. If you're saying that he's infinite wisdom, infinite bina, it doesn't matter it's chachma bina. It's infinite.
One more mufla than the other either, because it's in a level of.
But you could, for example. I'll give you an example. Let's say a physicist can appreciate the divine through physics, and he sees the grandiosity of God there, and someone else will see it in a different way.
That's already in the tziyur.
Right, that's what he's trying to say. There's no tziyur in it. We have to listen. This needs a little iyun. So what? It's good. I was getting a little complacent myself, so now it's time to wake up and realize, there's no cruising here, my friends. The plane gets to 30,000 feet, you can cruise. This is like this, Mount Everest. Yeah. It's like you're going like this all the time. Once in a while, it's a psashtikal. Okay, let's stop here. Let me do that. We did chapter 124, page 240 and 241. Guys, you can learn it and give me your take on it. Listen.